Pursuant to Section 84-1412 of the Nebraska statutes, the public is hereby informed that a current copy of the Nebraska Open Meetings Act is in the board meeting room on the north wall. The purpose of the meeting is to receive an update from staff regarding the proposed high school student assignment plan and high school academies and pathways. Roll call, please, Mr. Ray.
Cassidy.
Here.
Erdenberger.
Here.
Head. Here. Holman.
Present.
Cracky. Smith. Snipes.
Present.
Snow. Thielen.
Present.
6 present.
Is there a motion to excuse those board members' absence today?
So moved.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it was moved by Mr. Head and seconded by Vice President Erdenberger to excuse Mr. Snow, Ms. Cracky, and Mr. Smith from tonight's meeting. Roll call, please.
Thielen.
Aye.
Cassidy.
Aye.
Erdenberger.
Aye.
Head.
Aye.
Holman.
Aye.
Snipes.
Aye.
6 aye.
Motion carries. Moving on to our first informational item, C1A, update on the proposed high school student assignment plan. And tonight we have Dr. McFarland here to present. Good evening.
Good evening, thank you. As Dr. Holman said, I'm Annie McFarland. I'm the coordinator in Student and Community Services. And while you have myself and Mr. Casey Hughes from research here, I want to start by sharing with you the proposal that you will be seeing this evening is the result of a lot of effort of a lot of people from across the district, many of who are in this room. And while you often hear Casey or myself presenting this work, this really is the culmination of all of our colleagues, and we would like to thank them as we present this evening. Now, before we begin, just a few words about the format for this evening's presentation. Casey and I will be presenting on the student assignment plan, and you may have previously participated in a small group or in our community meetings. This is the same presentation with the data that has informed our proposal. For the sake of time, we would ask if you have questions to go ahead and write them down, as we may address them as we move to the different components and metrics in the presentation. However, if there's something that you would like on a particular metric, please feel free to interrupt us. Following the discussion on the student assignment plan proposal, we will switch places with our colleagues from curriculum and instruction support for the discussion on the college and career academies and pathways. And with that, we'll go ahead and begin. So at its core, the student assignment plan helps to determine where a student attends school and their eligibility for district-provided transportation and their prioritization in school choice. The student assignment plan also helps support the district in being able to manage our school populations so that they're appropriate in size for school capacity and for our staffing utilization. There are several reasons that we are redesigning the high school student assignment plan at this time. The first is the building of our 2 new high schools that are scheduled to open in August of 2022, because the current plan does not accommodate for those schools. Additionally, our current plan was implemented in 2010 to align to the establishment of the learning community. Now, the current plan is based on socioeconomic integration, in which a family reports their free and reduced lunch eligibility for placement prioritization and transportation eligibility. In 2010, about 60% of our high school students qualified for free and reduced lunch. That has increased to about 80% today, which makes that metric outdated. Secondly, the elementary and middle school student assignment plans were updated in 2017, and they no longer align to our high school plan. One of the guiding principles in the process for the elementary and middle school was increasing our transportation efficiency. We were able to accomplish this by reducing buses, increasing ridership, and pairing our buses with our secondary routes to make them more efficient. Now, Casey will talk a little bit in a moment about that because that's one of our guiding principles as we go through the high school process. We have more routes for our high school buses, and so therefore it's less efficient currently. Finally, the current plan only provides for transportation eligibility at the neighborhood schools for 4 of our current schools, those that are designated as magnets: Northwest, South, North, and Benson. The eligibility is for students who attend their neighborhood school, those 4 schools, and live more than 3 miles from the school. If we just change the boundaries to include the new schools, we would reduce that eligibility for neighborhood to only 2 schools. The student assignment plan has several components that work together to define the plan. The first is district-provided transportation that has 2 parts. The first being neighborhood transportation. Currently, we have about 60% of our high school students that attend their neighborhood school. The second part of that transportation is transportation to a non-neighborhood, or what we sometimes refer to as an option school. Currently, about 40% of our high school students attend a non-neighborhood school. The second component of the student assignment plan is programming. Now, we know that students will choose high schools for a variety of reasons, but one of them is for the curricular programming that they have. And you'll have an opportunity to hear from our colleagues in curriculum and instruction support a little bit later. But please know that we have worked closely with our colleagues to make sure that we have included in our plan proposal access for students for diverse programming across the district. The final component of the student assignment plan is the school choice process. Now, for high schools, that means that students every year in January, our 8th graders receive information about the high schools and have an opportunity to visit high schools at their open houses. They then will submit their application and have an opportunity to choose 3 schools, a first, a second, and a third prioritization in their high school choices. We don't have enough space at all of our schools to be able to accommodate first choice for every student, so we run a lottery through that prioritization school choice process. All of these components work together to give us our high school student assignment plan. The development process for the information that you're going to see tonight really began in earnest in the fall of 2019 when the Board of Education adopted the boundary recommendation that will be implemented in 2022 with the opening of our new schools. We expanded our boundary committee to what we call our student assignment plan committee, making sure that we had representation from all departments across the district. From October 2019 through February of last year, we studied a variety of information: student demographics, school capacities, utilization, school choice patterns, transportation data. And we developed several concepts of what we thought a high school student assignment plan for the Omaha Public Schools could look like. From March of last year, pretty much through today, we have vetted those options both internally and externally with groups and created a survey to gather that feedback that helps us to identify these concepts. Internally, we reviewed this data with all departments and staff members from schools, with members of you, the Board of Education, and we work closely with the staff in our schools that work directly with families on a daily basis to enroll them in school, to transfer schools, to find resources to support them with attendance and transportation. This would be our student placement office, our school support liaisons, our elementary administrators, our high school and middle school administrators, as well as our family and community relations specialists. Externally, we held focus groups with community representatives. We also met with our district citizens advisory and our parent groups, and then my personal favorite, our high school students. we asked all of our high schools to identify some juniors and seniors that we could gather together and ask them about their experience in making a school choice and about the options that were available to them. We showed them our models and we asked them for their feedback on them. All of those, we continued to take that feedback and to modify them to the proposal that you're going to see tonight. Throughout the process, just as we did when we updated the elementary and middle school, we had 3 guiding principles: equity, simplicity, and efficiency. Now, these principles all work together for our student assignment plan. From an efficiency or from an equity perspective, we look to take a look at the resources that we have and how we could equitably distribute them across the district. From a simplicity perspective, we attempted to limit the impact on our families as we were implementing this process. And from an efficiency, we wanted to make sure that we were supporting our school populations, that we were looking to evaluate our transportation costs, just as we had done previously. Maximizing all of these goals is difficult because they can sometimes work against each other. For example, we could come up with a program that could be very simple and equitable, which is just providing transportation to all students for the schools they choose. However, that wouldn't be very efficient, and it would certainly significantly increase the cost. We chose instead to kind of find a balance and to put these metrics together to come up to the plan that we've developed. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Casey Hughes from Research, who's going to take you through those demographics.
Thank you, Dr. McFarland. First, let's walk through high school transportation costs and high school transportation today as a way to get us kind of grounded in the proposal for high school transportation and the student assignment plan in the future. So the current high school student assignment plan began in 2010, as Dr. McFarland suggested, with the creation of the learning community. Under the current plan, we transport about 5,000 students to a high school. And so this equates to about 35 to 36% of all high school students that are transported to one of their schools. We transport about 420 students to their neighborhood school, and so that's only about 5% of all students who attend their neighborhood school. We also transport about 4,600 students to a non-neighborhood school or an option school, and so that's about 84% of all students who attend a non-neighborhood school. So in general, we're outlaying a lot of our transportation for those students who are attending non-neighborhood schools at the current time. We contract about 130 buses to do this transportation at a cost of about $5.9 million. Each bus, on average, costs about $45,000, while a paired bus, so that's a bus that's paired with an elementary school route, costs about $34,000 because we can split that cost between the 2 routes. And only running a high school route, so an unpaired bus, costs about $57,000. The first element we're going to discuss tonight is neighborhood transportation, or that transportation eligibility for students who attend their neighborhood school. And again, this last year, it's about 60% of all high school students. Currently, about 1,700 students living more than 3 miles from, again, the 4 magnet schools are eligible for transportation to their neighborhood school. Now, as you look at that column for current eligible students, you'll notice that no students are actually eligible at Benson. And so we have students eligible at North, Northwest, and South that equate to about 1,700 students. When we look at our boundaries being changed in 2022-23, the movement of those boundary lines has still no students eligible at Benson, again, 71 students eligible at North, down to 315 students eligible to Northwest, and only 23 students eligible at South, for a total of about 400 students. Again, if we were to kind of look at that 3-mile distance and then apply it to all of our high schools in the future, we'd have about 23 to 2,400 students who would be eligible for neighborhood transportation. But we'd have some attendance areas like Benson who would still have no students who are eligible for that transportation, while an attendance area like Burke that had about 700 students who would be eligible for neighborhood transportation. So as we reviewed this option and we reviewed what we could do for neighborhood transportation, we realized that our current rule set didn't really work with our new school boundaries, and it wasn't really equitable if we kind of just extended it out to all 9 high schools. So again, our goal was to create neighborhood transportation in an equitable, efficient, and simple way. So to do this, we created neighborhood transportation areas in each of our 9 high school attendance areas. And so these are the shaded areas on the map in each attendance area. Some attendance areas have 2 different areas. And the black dots on the map represent student populations who would be eligible for transportation. So if we use Northwest as an example, students who live in the shaded areas of each attendance area would be eligible to their neighborhood school. So the students in that shaded area in Northwest would be eligible for transportation to Northwest. Conversely, if a student lives in that gray area outside of the transportation area, they would not be eligible for transportation to their neighborhood school of Northwest in this case. So these transportation areas exist at all 9 high schools. Instead of using distance to draw them, we use streets in generally those areas that were farthest away from each school in each attendance area. As we looked at applying neighborhood transportation rules, we realized that our attendance areas are different. Benson has a small attendance area, and the school sits right in the middle. 156th and Ida is a very large attendance area, and the school is all the way out on one of the edges. So because of that, we started to looking at transportation areas that are the kind of the farthest away in each attendance area. We attempted to make a similar proportion of students eligible in each attendance area. And so overall, if you look at the table at the bottom, this plan would have about 1,700 to 1,800 students who would be eligible, and about 13% of all high school students would be eligible for transportation to their neighborhood school. And you can see that the eligibility percentage is very similar across all schools. So similar to the current plan, we have about 1,700 to 1,800 students who are eligible under this proposal. But again, eligibility extends from really 3 schools today to 9 schools in the future. I should also note that the majority of the transportation that we would be providing here to neighborhood students is new transportation, so students who are not eligible today. For the second component, we're going to talk about transportation to non-neighborhood schools. So again, those students who are choosing to attend a choice school or to attend an option school. And again, this is about 40% of all students in the district today. So we reviewed several different options and possibilities for providing transportation, and eventually we settled on a concept that's very similar to our elementary and middle school plan, where we group our schools into zones. We then reviewed and vetted numerous different school zone combinations from the perspective of student demographics, school capacities, current school choice patterns, and school programming, to name a few. What we're proposing is what we think is one of the best combinations of schools, but by no means is it perfect from any one perspective. One of the things that we learned as we tried to group schools together and find the best combination is that there is not a perfect combination. Every time you found a zone that worked really well for those 3 schools in the zone, you had another zone that wouldn't work well. And so we think that the current combination of Zone 1 being Burke, North and South, Zone 2 being Central, Benson, and 156th and Ida, and Zone 3 being Northwest, Bryan, and 60th and L, does a lot of good from all of the perspectives that we looked at. And we'll look at a few of those here in a moment. So this chart tries to give you an idea of the capacity and the demographics of the zones that were created. So the first thing we looked at was utilization. And so in order to understand the population at a school and how much space is available, we look at the neighborhood population of a school, so how many students live in the attendance area, and we compare that to the physical space in the school. And that gives us a utilization percentage. So overall, when we add 2 new high schools, we'll be at about 83% of capacity for our high schools, meaning that we fill up about 83% of the physical space we have in our high schools with our high school student population. If we look at it across all 3 zones, we can see that we have a Zone 1 at about 77%, Zone 2 at about 84%, and Zone 3 at about 89%. So all pretty close to that 83% average. But when you look at each individual school, you see that it ranges from as low as 70% at Burke to as high as 94% at Northwest. So grouping those schools into zones does get that utilization percentage a little bit closer to the overall district average. And the idea is to have a balance of space and population. If you have a balance of space and population, you should be able to allow students to move. There's not too many seats or too many students for the seats available at the schools. The second component that we looked at is demographics. Really wanted to make sure that we didn't isolate student populations when we grouped our schools together. So using free and reduced lunch, we can see that overall the district is about 77% free and reduced lunch, meaning that 77% of all our high school students are eligible for free and reduced lunch. And again, if you look across the schools, you can see some schools as low as 44% in their neighborhood and some as high as 91% in the case of South. But our zones are balanced. They're more balanced than the individual schools. And so they range from about 81% in zones 1 and 3 and 70% in zone 2. So again, really trying to bring those zones in alignment with the overall district average for our high school students. So across the chart, you can see we looked at that from a number of different perspectives. So English language learners, special education students, and race ethnicity to try to make sure that our zones are representative of our district on average. And we think that these combinations do a pretty good job of grouping our schools together in a very diverse way. So here's a map and a table at the bottom of those proposed zones. In its simplest way to describe this, a student is eligible for transportation to the 2 other schools in the same zone as their neighborhood school. So if we use Burke as an example, if a student lives in the Burke neighborhood, they'd be eligible for transportation to both North and South. If a student lived in the Central neighborhood, they'd be eligible for transportation to both Benson and 156th and Ida. And if a student lived in the Northwest area, they'd be eligible for transportation to 60th and L and Bryan. So these zones provide all students with transportation to 2 other non-neighborhood schools based on where they live. Again, that's different from our current plan that uses free and reduced lunch eligibility. We wanted to provide one more choice because in a lot of the conversations that we had, 3 choices seemed to be where people were landing. 2 choices maybe was not enough. All choices at all 8 high schools or all other 8 high schools was maybe too many. So 3 seemed to be a good place to land. Adding an additional school for each school, we added for students in the Burke neighborhood, Northwest, for students in the North neighborhood, 156th and Ida, for students in the South neighborhood, Bryan, for students in the Central neighborhood, 60th and L, for students in the Benson neighborhood, Burke, for students in the 156th and Ida neighborhood, North, for students in the Northwest neighborhood, Benson, students living in the Bryan neighborhood, South, and the 60th and L neighborhood, Central. So the chart on the very bottom gives you the full scope of the zones. It allows you to determine a student's partner schools based on the neighborhood school or the attendance area in which a student lives. So again, if we use Burke as an example, if a student or a family lives in the Burke attendance area, their partner schools are North, South, and Northwest. So again, those 2 schools in the zone and that 1 additional school that we've added. Overall, this provides 3 additional choices for a student with transportation to a non-neighborhood school. We also have to keep in mind that choices will be limited, right? There's never going to be a plan that allows us to seat every student in their first choice of high school if it's not their neighborhood school. And so while this plan tries to align transportation to a set of schools, we're still going to have that capacity, and sometimes choice outpaces the amount of seats that you have. And then finally, students can continue to apply and attend any high school in the district. Simply because we're aligning transportation to a group of schools does not mean that families cannot apply and attend other schools that are outside of their zone, that it's not one of their partner schools. I want to make sure that's very clear. I want to make sure that even when we have to implement a plan like this, we would not be forcing students to leave simply because they're not eligible for transportation or because they're not at one of their partner schools. So one way to judge how this plan might function in the future is to kind of understand how it supports the choices that are happening today. So this chart right here is a live-attend chart. On the left-hand side is a student's neighborhood school, and so that's where a student lives. Across the top is a student's enrollment school, so that's where a student is attending. So this whole chart is kind of all of our high school students, where they live and where they're attending. So if we use Benson as an example, find it easier to kind of just use one school because there's a lot on this chart. And we go from the left-hand side across the right. Students in the Benson neighborhood, about 591 of them attend Benson, right? So they're attending their neighborhood school. 52 students attend Bryan, 102 students attend Burke, 317 attend Central, 233 attend North, 179 attend Northwest, and 43 attend South. Now, there are no students who are attending 156th and Ida and 60th and L because those schools haven't opened yet. But altogether, we support about 45% of the choices going out of the Benson neighborhood with this plan, because we've supported the students who attend Central, about 317 of them, as well as the students that will in the future attend 156th and Ida, and 102 students who are currently attending Burke as that one additional school. So the other way to look at this is from a student's enrollment school. So again, if we start at the top, there's 591 students who are enrolled at Benson that live in the Benson neighborhood. There's 11 students coming from the Bryan neighborhood, 40 from Burke, 90 from Central, 208 from North, 285 from Northwest, 30 from South, 51 from 156th and Ida. That's the new attendance boundary that will be created in 2022-23. 54 from 60th and L, and 11 students who are opting from outside the district to attend Benson. And so again, looking at how much of that choice we're supporting, there's about 55% of the choices that are going to Benson, outside of their neighborhood students, are being supported under this plan. And so that's because we're supporting 90 students attending from the central area and 51 students coming from the 156th and Ida area, as well as 285 students who are enrolling from the current Northwest attendance area. Altogether, the current plan, or the proposed plan, supports about 42% of all the choices that are happening today. And so this amounts to about 2,000 students who would be eligible for transportation in the future to the school that they're currently attending. Now, this is just a snapshot, right? It's a point in time, and it's just one way for us to kind of understand how this plan could function in the future. There would be about 2,700 students who would not be eligible for transportation because their choice isn't supported by one of the partner schools. However, we know that number is very high, and it's for a number of different reasons. First is 9th grade students will not lose transportation when this plan takes effect, right? They will come into the plan as 9th graders under a new student assignment plan, as opposed to lose transportation because they're already at a high school. Additionally, we have about 18 months before this plan would take place. And so we know that of the students that are going to be impacted, we think about 2,000 students will need to be contacted starting as early as this spring to try to mitigate as much of that impact for families as possible. And so to put it in perspective, 2,000 students who will likely be impacted is about 14% of all high school students. The next component we wanted to review is the college and career academies and pathways and how they will interact with the transportation plan that we just described. So because each student will be eligible for transportation to 3 non-neighborhood schools, we want to make sure that each student has access to diverse specialty programming in the academies and pathways. So while we cannot provide transportation to every student to every school or program, the plan that we've described does provide access with transportation to many programs across the district. And so you can review the chart and locate a student's neighborhood school across the top, and again, use it to identify which school or which programs a student would have eligibility to at their neighborhood school, as well as at their 2 zone schools. Additionally, the blue arrows will point you to the +1 school, or that additional school that students could attend with transportation. And so again, using Burke as an example, students would be eligible for the programs at Burke as their neighborhood school, as well as the programs at North and South with transportation, and Northwest as that one additional school and the programs located there. It's also important to understand that the academies and pathways are really an evolution and a refocusing of high school curriculum. English language services, special education services, core academic and elective courses will still be offered at all schools. Advanced placement and dual enrollment, fine and performing arts, health and physical sciences, JROTC, and world languages, all of the things we've come to understand from a regular high school experience will still be happening at all of these high schools. This is just looking at those career academies and pathways and how transportation is aligned for accessing those different programs. The final component that we want to discuss is school choice. And so this is that process that takes place every January and February The placement office sends out applications to every eighth grader. They look at these applications, they review materials, they attend open houses, and they eventually submit back a first, second, and a third choice high school. Now again, because we don't have the ability to place every student in their first choice, we do have to run a lottery and kind of weight students in order to place them in the seats that are available. And so beginning in the 22-23 school year, we would first prioritize neighborhood students as we do today. And so this would not be a change, and obviously we want to make sure that those students that want to attend their neighborhood school have the ability to do that. Second, we would place students who have siblings at the school. And so this is something we also do today. We want to make sure that we keep families and siblings together where families want their students to be at the same school, if possible. Third, we would place students who are applying to a partner school where they would receive transportation. And so we realize that transportation is an important resource for many of our families. And so we want to value that choice to a school where transportation would be provided over a choice from a family who might be applying to a school where they would not receive transportation. And so that final placement would be those students who are applying to a school that is not one of their partner schools where they would not be eligible for transportation. And again, it's important to remember that at any one of these categories, with the exception of neighborhood, we will have to have space available at the school. And really that ends up being a function of the number of students that are in that grade level coming into the school at that time, the amount of staffing and space we have available, and then how many choices we have, and how that all plays out during school selection. So if you bring all of the components together, neighborhood transportation would be provided to students who live in one of the transportation areas to their neighborhood school. And so again, that's represented by the shaded areas on the map. Option transportation, or students getting transportation to a non-neighborhood school, would again be for those two other zone schools and that one additional school identified by the arrow. Finally, school choice would prioritize applications by placing neighborhood students first, siblings second, as we do today, then students applying to one of their partner schools where they'd be eligible for transportation, and then placing any remaining applications in the space available. So coming back around to cost, looking at what this plan could cost maybe a few years after implementation, we believe that overall we might transport fewer students than we do today. So today it's about 5,000 students. We think maybe this plan would transport about 4,400 students. So that's from about 35% of all high school students down to about 30% of high school students. We think we'd transport more neighborhood students. Again, we would likely transport students to their neighborhood school because we are expanding that transportation from really what would be 3 schools today to 9 schools in the future. And we think we'd transport fewer students to non-neighborhood schools because we're limiting that transportation to just those 3 other schools as opposed to a potential 8 in the future if students could get transportation to any location. If we look overall, this reduction amounts to about 17 fewer buses that would be needed to do this transportation. If we use the unpaired route cost, which is about $57,000, we think it would be a savings of roughly just under $1 million. But all of this really depends on how families react to the plan. We think that we will still see a lot of high school choice that will happen outside of those partner schools. We have a similar plan at the elementary and middle school level today, and even though families are limited in terms of where they can go with transportation, we still have about 60% of all elementary school families attend a non-neighborhood school where they're not eligible for transportation, and that's about 40% at the middle school level. And so we think we'd still see a large population of families optioning or going to a non-neighborhood school at the high school level, even if transportation were limited to just these three other schools for any given student. We've also been collaborating with Metro Transportation to improve accessibility and student fares across the OPS system. Currently, 6 of our 9 future high schools will be well served by Metro's transportation infrastructure. 156 in Ida and Bryan essentially have really no good transit access. Burke High School's closest stop is about a mile away. But all of our other schools are very well served. So we recognize the need for students to have transportation options to access schools and other important destinations like work, healthcare, recreation. So we're going to continue to collaborate with Metro, and we'll keep you updated on that work as it proceeds. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. McFarland to give you our next steps.
Thank you. So following tonight's workshop, we plan to take back the feedback and review the proposal through the lens of tonight's discussion. We will continue. You can go to sap.ops.org, our website, where we have all of our resources posted, and we'll continue to update that as we move along. On March 1st, we plan to come to the Board of Education and make a final recommendation for the student assignment plan, and then return on the 16th and request your action. Now, the real work will begin after adoption, because it's at that time that we can start to look at how this plan will impact our families and start to communicate this to them. First and foremost is educating our community and our families about the plan and how it potentially can impact them, as well as identifying those resources to help support them and lessen the impact. That is why it's critical that we have the 18 months that we have before implementation in August of 2022 to have those conversations. Much as we did ahead of implementation of the elementary and middle school plan, we identified those families, as you heard Casey mention, about 2,000 families that will be impacted, that will lose transportation. This will be our current 8th, 9th, and 10th grade students. Having that year will help us to work with our families to identify resources to help support them, and also to continue our collaboration with our community partners to provide those resources. We will also train our staff not only on the plan and the impacts, but also on the programming, the school choice process, and the transfer process, so that we can really work to mitigate those challenges for our families in advance of implementation. In February of 2022, a year from now, we will be starting that school choice process again. Even though we're currently going to continue to operate under the current plan, we will make sure that our families understand through that school choice process how the implementation can impact them. And then school transfer process, and every time we work with our families to make sure that they know once it's adopted how the plan could impact their choices. In August of 2022, we will begin under the new high school student assignment plan. Now, it's important to note that we'll continue to monitor that with our families to see that this plan is doing what it is we intend to do and how it's impacting our families as they adapt to the plan, their school choice patterns, as well as other impacts that it could have on our district, and then make modifications as we see necessary. Again, we'll continue to post all of our updates as we go forward on our student assignment plan website. And that's where you can currently access the community meetings. You can see that. We'll even post information on all of the high schools as we go forward with the plan. And with that, I think we're ready to address any questions that you have.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Could you repeat the website address again?
Yes, our student assignment plan website is sap.ops.org.
Thank you so much, Dr. McFarland. Board colleagues, any questions? Mr. Thielen?
Thank you, Dr. Holman.
Yes.
I guess the first question I have is, excuse me, Casey, you mentioned how this is going to affect ninth graders going in this year, and I'm not sure I understood it exactly. Can you go over that a little bit more in detail?
So how this will affect current ninth grade students or students who will be in ninth grade in 22, 23?
21, starting in 21.
So I think when I was discussing ninth graders, for those students who are coming into high school in 2022-23, when this plan takes effect, they wouldn't lose transportation, right? So their impact, they wouldn't have an impact because they're kind of coming into a new plan. So when we look at a chart like that Live at 10 chart and try to kind of guess how much impact this plan will have, that's a high number because it's taking everybody in grades 9 through 12 and saying how much choice are we supporting, how much choice are we not supporting. But if you take a whole class out of it, obviously that number starts to drop. So if we just flipped a switch today and said, okay, we're changing the student assignment plan, there might be about 2,700 students who are not eligible. But we believe that number is going to be about 2,000 based on a lot of the estimates that we've already done for students who are enrolled next year, because that ninth grade class will not be impacted and because we have a lot of other boundary situations that will kind of mitigate some of the impact for students.
Thank you. That was a lot of really good information. My question is, when you talk about the 2,000 families that will possibly be impacted, it might be like a two-part question, but I assume that working with Metro is one way to kind of fill that gap. Do you have any other ideas around that? And when you talk about measuring the impact, do you know about how long it will take before you really know?
Well, first of all, part of it is looking at the resources that are available, not just within Metro, but also with our families. As you know, we have a population in our district that's very mobile. We also have some exciting changes that are coming with our programming update. So we have families all the time that will take a look at what's going to be the best to meet their needs, but also at the same time looking at what are other resources that might be available in the family. Is there somebody else in the family who could support with transportation? Are there carpooling options? Is the family going to be anticipating a move in the next 18 months? Does that play into it? But really looking at how we can work to mitigate that. Again, when we did this with the elementary and middle school, we originally had about 3,700 families that were impacted. And over time, as we had those individual conversations with families about their particular situation, we really looked to identify those resources. And by the time we got to the summer before implementation, we had reduced that to 800. So we anticipate that same kind of work.
Mr. Snow?
Thank you, Madam President. Dr. McFarland or Mr. Hughes, the eligibility for students to ride the bus, are we taking into account or separating the students that currently get special education busing, or are they still included in those numbers for eligibility?
So students who are eligible for transportation according to their IEP will still continue to receive that transportation.
Correct. I'm asking, my reference to it is, if you go to your slide when you're showing the percentage of students
yes,
that are eligible.
this is our
are
general
those
education.
included, just general, so it doesn't include
Correct.
the special education students? Okay.
Yes, and some of those are special education students. They're just not verified for transportation eligibility in their IEP.
Yeah, so this chart actually shows all students, but when we calculate the number of students impacted, we have to look at who's actually transported. And when we do that, we do take out those special education students because they would not be impacted by this plan.
Perfect. That answers my question there. And I have another part of that. I know this is hard. How do we take into account how many students are getting on the bus and utilizing it? We can talk about efficiency, but if we really can't see if they're utilizing the bus every day, we don't know how efficient. We know in theory it is, but if the students are actually, does that make sense?
I think so, and I'll answer, and then if I'm not addressing you correctly or...
I can reword it. It's at the end you were talking about working with the families moving forward, as this plan and adjusting it. How do we measure if this is efficient?
So part of what we identify are those students that are eligible. And yes, some of these students that are eligible are not using district-provided transportation, but based on our current plan, they're eligible. If a family, let's just say pre-pandemic, if a family had communicated that they didn't need the bus and they happened to be the only person at that stop, transportation does allow a period, and then if the student is saying, I'm not using it or they're not showing up, they do eliminate that stop. So that's one thing that happens. Now, I will tell you, during our pandemic, we've kept all of our stops in place because we know our families have had different impacts to change their learning model. And we want to make sure that that bus is still there. So that's one thing, is looking at how that will be done based on who's eligible. And then you had a second part of that?
I mean, just as you're working with families, I mean, what does that look like, and how do you keep this very fluid?
And again, that changes periodically depending on a family's situation. I mean, we sometimes have families that they don't need district-provided transportation, and then something happens and they do. So we do work with them on an individual basis, and it really is based on, once transportation is set from our school choice process and over the summer that's routed, then we go ahead and we take a look at whether that transportation eligibility, even though they may be eligible, is there a bus there, is there space on the bus, and how we can work with them.
And I'm assuming you're in charge of this plan, correct?
Well, I think we all share it, but yes,
Well,
the student community services staff work directly with those students. It's our school support liaisons at the building level. It's our placement staff members here, our elementary assistant principals. But yes, we do. And then ultimately, we all support. There will be some families that sometimes we take a look at their particular situation and we work with them.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Mr. Head?
Thank you, President Holman. And I've got a couple of different questions. Is it all right if I just ask it? Perfect. Well, thank you both for the presentation. I know a lot of years and time went into putting this together, so I really appreciate all of that. And I guess most of my questions we've already talked about previously in student assignment committee meetings. So now one of the biggest concerns that I have with this program is looking at, in order to, I guess, achieve all the programming that we want, it takes all 9 of the high schools. But with the transportation, you've got transportation provided to, your 2 schools in your zone, your +1, and maybe your home school, depending on where you live. So if I'm a kid who lives in the South attendance area, but I want to do health, which is at 156 in Ida, I mean, how's that kid going to fit in? How are they going to get access to that programming if they don't have a car? Because I don't want to be looking at students in the district and essentially saying, well, thanks for playing, but next time live somewhere else.
So I think it's important to understand that even today there are students who are not eligible for transportation. Albeit it's a smaller percentage, it's about 20%. But if you're a full pay student, for instance, you're not eligible for transportation to Burke as a non-neighborhood student. So there are still situations today where students are not eligible to get to a specific school or program. We have the same setup at our middle school and elementary school level. I think ideally we would provide transportation to every student to every school. But understanding that that's not kind of a reality, what we attempted to do was try to provide a diverse amount and type of programs that students can get to. Understanding that if a family feels very, very strongly, or the student feels very strongly that they need to get to a specific program, that space can still be there for them to attend that school, but that we would align transportation in a way that we just described.
All right, thank you. And then another big concern that I have is, and we've talked about grandfathering transportation a couple times, and the logistical nightmare and the cost that would be associated with that. But I still look at grandfathering as essentially a cost of doing business in a way. I think it's unfair to have a kid that when they started their high school career, we said we're going to be providing transportation to you, and then their sophomore year we pull the rug out and say, oh, never mind. So what options do we have there? And I know you're working with those families and targeting them to provide possible other avenues beforehand, but what all are we doing there?
So this is the practice that we followed when we implemented the elementary and the middle school student assignment plan. And so we also looked at identifying what those resources are beyond the district as well. And so that's why we continue to have our collaboration in talking to Metro and looking at the student fee structure moving forward in the Omaha area. And so that's one possibility, but it is also, we just don't have the ability to run 2 student assignment plans simultaneously. And so again, following that similar practice, it's working with our families on that individual basis to look at all the resources that are available, both within the district, in their homes, and in the community. I will also just add, with our updating in the programming as well as the mobility of our families, their situations change frequently. So that's part of that conversation and the advantage of having about 18 months before we implement.
Okay. And then I guess the last major question that I have is, you had mentioned that with the assignment plan, students won't be forced to leave the school that they're at. And so I represent a significant portion of the Burke/Northwest attendance area. And so I know that's in a little bit of a different situation, because with opening the new school, when you open a new school, you have to have students to put in it. But I had a number of my parents in that area get an email saying that when the new school opens, their students will be forced to move to that school. So I guess, will those students, assuming that Burke or Northwest have capacity, will they be given some sort of a priority to opt back to where they were if they so choose?
So once the plan's adopted and we go forward, that's going to also influence that conversation. But that's been our practice as a district with the schools that we've opened. We opened Gifford Park recently. We had the families move. The same with Davis, which was the last middle school that we opened. And truly, we see that about 60% of our high school students attend their neighborhood school. So it will be working with those families that we have. You cited, for example, the 156th and Ida attendance area, which is currently going to be made up of some of the attendance area of Northwest and Burke. And so we did want them to be communicated with ahead of time, and we've had several families that have reached out and said, I want to go. We will also look at where other options are. I mean, with the programming coming, they may say, hey, look, I'm learning about this programming, and I really want to have this option to go to this school. So it will be working with those families on an individual basis. But as we're opening these new schools, yes, we do have to fill them. And it would have been great if we could have opened with 9th grade only, but that's just not going to be possible with all the resources that we have to support the opening of the new schools.
All right. Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into it and the advance notice, 2 years ahead of time, telling the families, hey, this is coming down the pipe. So I really appreciate that. And like you said, I imagine that the vast majority of those families are going to say they want to go to the new school. I'm just thinking about the few families that for whatever reason, the kid doesn't want to leave their friends or they've got a teacher that they really like. I want to make sure that they have the ability to, stay at the school they were at if that's the best fit for them.
So we do run our school choice process every year, and we have our student transfer process that runs throughout the year. And again, to be honest with you, Mr. Head, it will be working with each family on an individual basis, but really trying to make sure that we are being good stewards of the resources that we have in opening and filling our schools and meeting the needs of our families.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Mrs. Cassidy.
Thank you, Dr. Holman, President Holman. Maybe I'm a little bit biased because I've been on this committee since the development started in October. So I have seen firsthand how much work has gone into this. I mean, from first of all, just thinking about gathering the data to start, the census information and all of the background data that goes into just figuring out how to get to this point is phenomenal to me. You guys are, what you do is insanely high level to me. I would never want to do what you do. Research, no way. So thank you for all that you've done, because I've seen firsthand. This is tough. Trying to make every single party happy, it is an impossible feat. But I can say that I have seen this group, it's almost like a puzzle, moving pieces, continuously trying to see what is the best plan. It has really happened. And if people don't see that, you're just not seeing it, because it really has happened throughout this process. Moving this school to this school to this zone to see how we can keep equity. That's our first one of our guiding principles. Trying to keep our costs down is huge. We are stewards of the taxpayers' money, and we have to keep this cost of transportation where it needs to be. And that's clearly, 17 buses, I believe the number was. So I just want to make it clear to the public, I've gotten a lot of emails that have said that we have not been transparent. I take a little bit of offense to that. This process has been transparent from the very beginning. You mentioned several internal groups, external groups. I don't know what else we could do. I mean, when you have something this large, you cannot engage, you can't have a focus group with every single parent. But we've tried to even involve our high school students in this process. So it has certainly been something that this committee has tried to do, and these folks in all these departments have really tried to do. One thing, though, that I have a question on is, you have said time and time again to just about every question in here that you will work with families individually. So that's great. I want everyone to hear that again. But what will this look like? I know you'll evaluate, and if things don't seem to be going the way that we hope it goes, what kind of process will there be change? Can this be altered, I guess, is my ultimate question.
Well, and I hope you heard me when we talked about the end, is to really monitor and see what happens as we implement the plan and how our families adapt to this, just as we did when we changed it back in 2010. Now, I can tell you with our elementary and middle school plan, we have continued to monitor that, and we are also going to be opening 2 new elementary schools and a middle school, and we've made adjustments based on that. We anticipate that going forward, we will do the very same thing. And I hope, Ms. Cassidy, you will continue to be on the Student Assignment Plan Subcommittee, because we will look at that. And then we will be able to make any recommendations or modifications as we go forward.
Well, like I said, it's been a lot of tremendous work. It's been an honor to see your teams work together and bring this type of data to us where we can understand it. And you've presented it very well this evening, where hopefully, it's a lot, but hopefully people can see that it's certainly been thoughtful in the process. I said at a meeting back when we announced the boundaries, unfortunately, though, there will be people that it will not be favorable for. I think I made the quote that there could be families that are looking out their window at a school, but it will be not in their boundary, and that will be tough. But it certainly has been a thoughtful process, and it has been one where your teams have really tried to make this the best process for as many as possible, with keeping in mind budgets, financial constraints, and equity for all students.
Thank you, Ms. Cassidy. And I do want to add, it really is the work of a lot of colleagues that are not sitting here this evening. And I would also add to you, having done school selection for many years, and you heard Casey talk about that, we don't have the ability to honor every first choice for every student. But I can tell you what I've looked at for years and years are the number of students that after they've been placed in a high school that are changing their school choices. And it is very low, very low. In fact, this year I can tell you we had 29 students that are current 9th graders go through the school choice process. Pre-pandemic, we had 26. So it's very small. And I think the responsibility is on us as the staff and the district to let students see what their opportunities are, to share those opportunities. You're going to hear our colleagues talk about transferable skills. That's what we teach in the Omaha Public Schools.
I would also just note that this is a snapshot in time, right? This is change that's happening right now, but the plan we're under today was implemented in 2010, right? The plan before that was implemented in 1999. And so while I hope we're not on a 10-year cycle, this is something that's continually updated. The neighborhood transportation that we see today, didn't exist the same way 7-8 years ago. And so there are always changes that get made. In our office, we review, the student assignment plan data, the option data, the school capacities, all of that movement each year. And so it's the work of our student assignment plan committee to look at those things that aren't working well and then find ways to adjust that. So certainly we will continue to do what we've done, for the last 20 years and adjust our plan based on the times that we are in.
One last, just for clarification, if families those individual families that might want to have this looked at closer on their family, individual basis, where's the best place they should start? Who should they contact? Should they go to the website? What do you recommend?
So I would suggest that a family contact their school. And for our high school students and middle school students, I would request that they speak with their school support liaison. They can also speak with staff at their schools. We have presented, we will continue. And truly, once the plan is adopted, we will have an intensive training with our staff to make sure that several people, including our school secretaries, can talk about the plan. But also, you can always contact Student Community Services, and we'll connect them with a staff member to talk about their particular situation.
Ms. Snipes?
I only had one more question. And just know when I ask these questions because the wheels are turning, I had the pleasure of actually sitting in some of your community information like data gathering, and those were really, really good and informational. I'm just wondering, as we talk about those 2,000 students, since, if I'm correct, this is now based more off of location as opposed to free reduced lunch, do you have an idea of how many of those students, or you'll have to work with the families, would be free reduced lunch, or would it be about the same as the average now?
As you saw, we have almost 80% of our students at the high school level that are eligible, and we'll really continue to work with them. But I would guess of the 2,000, it's probably going to be about 80%.
Yeah, and the last time that I looked at it, which would have been before we had students enrolled in 21, 22, it was about the same as the district average, so about 78%.
Mr. Thielen?
Thank you. I think the question I'd like to ask is about the input that you've received, and can you maybe talk about some of the most significant changes that you have that have been made to the plan based on the input you've received from stakeholders?
Sure. So I think if we start with neighborhood transportation, we went through iterations where we used different mileages, and we found that to be pretty limiting. Also, when you look at a mileage and maybe, if we understand our attendance areas are different sizes, right, and schools are located in different places, mileage was a hang-up for a lot of people who viewed the plan. They said, well, why is this one 2.5 and this one is 3, right? And so we decided to go to these transportation areas where we use streets because it gave us a lot more flexibility. At Benson, for instance, we were struggling to get a proportion of students that were eligible that was similar to our other schools. Because when you use a mileage, we wanted to use half-mile increments. The jump was so large, right? We'd add 20 buses with a half a mile. And so by using streets, we said we can modify those areas. We can be a little more specific about where we're drawing them. And it kind of gets rid of that complication around the mileage. We can say, well, are you in the transportation area? Yes or no. And there's not that, well, if I drive my car, it's, 2.1 miles. So it just takes some of that out of it. So I think that was one of the biggest steps we took for the neighborhood transportation. We had different models where, we looked at neighborhood transportation in different ways. And I think the proportional model, one where we got a similar amount of students eligible, got kind of the most support from people that we showed the plan to. From an option transportation perspective, we had zones that, grouped schools that were all close together, right? And so that does a lot of things, right? It would allow you to have a lot of supported transportation because students generally are kind of going to those schools that are close by, right? But when you look at the demographics for that, there was pretty much universal agreement that demographics, if we were to group, Northwest, North, and Benson, and 60th and L, and Bryan, and South all together only, that those would be too isolating for our population in our district. So, we really worked towards trying to find those combinations that were as diverse as possible. We had options early on where some schools had more choice than others. So where a school might get students that would come from 5 different schools, kind of made them a special school, if you will. But then we heard a lot of feedback that, we want our schools to be equitable. So we don't want school A to be able to get students from 2 schools, but school B gets students from 5 schools, and maybe has kind of an unfair advantage in terms of that overall. So those are just a few of the kind of the ideas that we worked through and heard feedback on, and tried to develop something that worked towards those. I guess the last part would be programming. Really, once we looked at that programming and we had kind of our final recommendation on programming, really making sure that the zones that we had put together had diverse options for every student. Very early or very late, I guess, in our proposal, we had a slightly different combination, and we had a zone that didn't have a Cambridge. And so we wanted to make that switch so that there was a Cambridge in that zone for those students who might want to get there.
I would just add, the thing that we heard most overwhelmingly was some form of neighborhood transportation eligibility at all 9 schools.
Ms. Erdenberger?
Thank you, Dr. Holman. Casey, I'm guessing that you're pretty good at playing Clue, because with all these little pieces you're moving around, all I could think of is how much I hate figuring out it's Colonel Mustard in the library with the candlestick. So I'm glad it's you and not me. I was particularly impressed, and this goes to what Mrs. Cassidy was saying, if you could just pull up for 1 second, just so everybody can marvel at it, the chart on page 9. Yeah, the one that came so close in each of those zones to being able to even out as many of our demographics as possible. That's truly a work of art. You gave the website that someone could go to. Is this PowerPoint available on that website? Because I'm just saying that as somebody who likes charts more than narrative, you could tell me this in words till you turn blue in the face, but a chart like this is super helpful for all of the information that you had.
We have our community presentations posted there, but after this evening, we can certainly post this PowerPoint as well.
They're virtually the same. I think this is the only one that's not on the other one, and maybe it's just a geek like me that's super impressed by it. So you can decide whether to change it or not. I think I'm following up on what Mr. Thielen and Ms. Snipes said, but in a more concrete way. We have somebody who's in 8th grade this year. They are picking a high school for next year. The high school they pick for next year, they will get transportation based on our 3 or 2.5 mile model. Is that right?
They'll receive transportation based on the current eligibility, yes.
Right, which I'm thinking of as a distance model.
For neighborhood students, it would be
Yes.
the
Right,
distance
that's-
model, and then for option students, it would be their free and reduced lunch status, and then the school that they're attending would
Right.
determine if they're eligible.
And if they've made choice through the school selection process or at another time of year.
Okay, I liked my question better. It was much simpler, but that's okay. It's a good answer. So they're making the choice based on this year's model, and then we will change it presumably before the 22 school year starts. And that's where the 2,000 kids may end up finding that they had transportation this year, but they don't have transportation then. Will they have a chance, if it matters? Because I agree with you. Most kids, once they've made a decision, very few of them are going to change. But if for some reason transportation is a big deal, do they have a chance going into their sophomore year to pick a school for which transportation would be available without any?
Yes, and once the plan's adopted and we can begin communicating that, there will be some families that will make a new choice this spring even before they've started high school. Once they know the plan and they can say, oh, I can provide transportation for this year, and then it will pick up with the new plan. So we will have that option available through our school transfer process. Again, once we know what the plan is and can start communicating, we'll be able to accommodate those conversations now. And that's really our hope in being able to reduce that 2,000. At the same time, we will look at, so we finish school selection very quickly here and in March, and then we start our school transfer process for the next year on April 15th. So we will look at any families who are going to be impacted by the new plan and prioritizing them for that school transfer process next April. They will have the opportunity next year, a year from now, to go through school selection if they choose. They could go through that choice process again. But we will take a look at those families and prioritize them before we open up that transfer process across the district.
Okay, I think you just answered what my next question was, because you went through priorities based on siblings and so on and so forth. But people that are losing transportation go to the top of the pile even before siblings? Is that what you're saying?
So once we're able to identify who's impacted directly and what that impact would be, we'll start communicating with those families and say, based on your address and your school of enrollment, here's what we see that impact. We would be more than willing to have that conversation with you. We'll have people at the school that will be able to hold those conversations. We will have people in our offices here that will be able to have those conversations. It really will depend on what a family wants. And we saw the same thing as we did with our elementary and middle school to be able to resolve this, because we do have families that are going to be moving. We do have families that will be making new choices based on other circumstances.
Okay, and then if you could go to page 11 for me, and I think, Casey, this is a question for you. I just was being sort of thick-headed, I think. I don't understand at the bottom what percent choice supported means. Are these are all current numbers? Is that right?
Sorry. This is all 2019-20 data, actually, because
Okay.
we wanted to use pre-pandemic on this, and we've been using this for about a year.
Sure.
Our choice doesn't change that dramatically from year to year because you're really only changing your 9th grade class, right? Your upper grades are kind of already there. And so this chart is essentially every high school student we have broke out by where they live and where they attend.
I'm just looking at the line at the
Yep.
bottom. That's the part.
And so
I'm
the line at the bottom
Mm-hmm.
is the percentage of choice going to the school at the top
Okay.
that is supported. So in the case of Benson, there are 591 students that attend from the neighborhood, but then the rest of the students are attending from outside of that neighborhood. And so we're supporting 55% of those students that are coming from outside the neighborhood going to Benson under this plan because of the 2 zone schools and that +1 school.
So supported is transportation. Is that- is
In
that what
this
you're saying?
chart specifically, this is all students, so it's not transportation. But in general, yes, transportation mirrors this, but we don't transport every student today. Even option students, we only transport about 85% or less than 85%. So, but this gets you to a general idea of the amount of transportation you would support. It mirrors it very closely.
Okay, so supported refers generally, when we say we support 55% of the kids going to Benson, are you saying?
Their school placement, their school choices and placement, so where the students are currently enrolled.
It's kind of an impact percentage.
Okay.
And it's actually the opposite of the impact, right? So we are not impacting 55% of students attending Benson, where we might be impacting 45% because their choices that they've made are not supported with transportation under this model or this proposed model.
Got it. Thank you. I may have to.
It's just, it's one way that we can try to understand how implementing a change like this might impact school populations. Because if we are, there's a high level of support at Benson, which means that there's fewer students at Benson that will be impacted than say Burke, right? So more students at Burke might be impacted by this change simply because of the combination of the zones. And we really did try to get a zone combination that supported as many choices as possible, but still did all the other things we wanted to do, right? Had the same diversity as the district, had capacities that were appropriate for the schools and populations. So again, 42%, we could have gotten higher than that in support, but when we try to balance all of those other pieces, this is the combination that we felt did kind of the best job. Not a perfect job by any means. I don't think we're claiming that this would be perfect, but it's the best combination for all of those things.
Practically perfect in every way. Thank you.
Mr. Head?
Hey, thank you, President Holman. Just 2 more quick questions. So, do we know about how many students right now are not attending their home attendance school because of a lack of transportation? And is the new transportation to home attendance schools going to help with that?
Well, I can tell you that we know that currently in our high schools, about 60% of our students are attending their neighborhood school, and about 40% are attending another school. As far as how many of them are needing transportation, I don't have that.
So we've done this survey numerous times over the years. I think we did one about a year and a half ago when we asked students who weren't attending their neighborhood school, what caused you to choose? And transportation, ranks like 5th maybe in the families that we surveyed. It runs the gamut for why students are not attending their neighborhood school. It could be their parents went to that school. It could be sports. It could be proximity to a parent's workplace or a place they used to live. I do believe that providing additional neighborhood transportation will likely have some families that maybe weren't going to choose their neighborhood school before would potentially choose their neighborhood school. So we are adding that transportation on that side of it, and I do think it will probably impact those home attendance area rates. Because in general, when we look at a student as they get farther away from their school in terms of distance, their likelihood to opt out kind of increases.
Yeah, makes sense, thank you. And then, so the follow-up to that, and I appreciate the information for, what students are opting out of their home attendance school to which schools. But with the implementation of the academies and pathways, do we have any idea, like, I think you said there's 60% of kids, give or take, that are in their home attendance school right now. So do we have modeling for, say if when the academies and pathways are implemented, say that goes down to 40% and we have a huge jump in students who we're providing transportation to, do we have modeling as far as, what that's going to cost to the district in terms of dollars, but also how many additional buses and if we can meet that capacity?
I mean, so we have attempted to model that. There are a number of characteristics or things that are going to be happening over the next 2-3 years that are going to impact that. Excuse me. So boundary changes is one of them. That's going to obviously impact how many students are attending their neighborhood school. The programming, college career and academies and pathways, that will impact it. This transportation plan will impact it. So our best estimate at this point is that we will likely transport more students to their neighborhood school, again, because we're expanding that to all 9 schools. So we think that's going to grow from maybe 400 to maybe 1,300, which still it's not, a huge percentage of those students that will attend their neighborhood school, but it's higher than it is today. Non-neighborhood students, I think there'll probably be more students attending a non-neighborhood school because we will have some additional capacity. Right now, the high school population is about 100% of our physical capacity of our school buildings. So some schools are a little bit below capacity, right? But others are way above capacity. And so with a district that has now, 83%, so we're filling up maybe 83% of those physical seats, there should likely be a few more places for students to get to. And so I think we might go from 40% up to 45, maybe back to 50%, where we were about 10 years ago, in terms of students attending an option school. So this kind of gets us to that 45% and thinks that we'll transport about 3,100 or about 50% of the students that are making choice. So because we're kind of orienting that transportation to, those 3 other schools for each student, we know we're going to be more efficient because we're kind of based on geography now, and those buses are going to be in the same places transporting students to similar schools. But we're also limiting that transportation to 3 schools as opposed to what could be 8 schools in the future, right? If we opened it up and added 2 new high schools and we said that every student could get transportation to all option schools, that would grow for some students from 6 to 8 and for other students from 4 to 8. So just in general, this should be less costly than what we're doing today, but it's all going to depend on those choices that do get made. And I think this is our best estimate, that we'll still have choice that's happening outside of those partner schools, and that we'll still transport a pretty large number of students to a non-neighborhood school, but just not the number that we do today.
Mr. Snow?
Thank you. Do you think many of our families, our mobility rate, I believe, is around 16% or up there? It's pretty high. Do you think because of the pandemic that mobility rate has probably been expanded with our current student population?
I think the pandemic has affected a lot of things that we thought we knew what would happen, and turns out we didn't know exactly what would happen. I assume mobility has been impacted. I know enrollment's been impacted. So, yeah.
And I'm assuming, I'm not at all challenging the plan or the work that has gone into this. You've been working on this, 2014 we started this process. And I can finally say none of you were on the board at that time. So there's a lot of effort that's gone into it, but I don't think our parents, even at that time when we were engaging parents on the elementary school and middle school model with those zones, I don't think we really paid. Is this plan able to move forward in a pandemic right now if we still have uncertainties, or is it something that is how do we connect to families to see where they're currently at, mentally, emotionally, where their family is, and are they aware what is going on before the train leaves the station and they're like, hey, I'm trying to figure out are we moving or not, because that does happen when school districts with high poverty, and higher poverty than our surrounding sub-districts. But when you have that, you have a lot of uncertainty where you don't know where the students will be, or if you say, hey, let it settle, do they come back? So my question on this at the end is, have we reconnected with our counterparts that we surveyed and the people that we talked to help develop this, to see where they're at, to see if there's anything that, I don't know, are there any tweaks that might need to be made or exceptions to be thought of if we're moving this still for March, April, and then talking to families in April this summer into next year about this plan?
I will answer. I was going to answer.
Okay.
I think that there are many unknowns in terms of where people are going to be. There are many things that the district has done over the last 12 months to address uncertainty, whether it's making sure that food is available for all families regardless of their free and reduced lunch status, or whether it's making internet available to all families with the assumption that people will need connectivity. Children are mobile because of a bunch of different circumstances. And so as we prepare to open, the schools are on track, which is kind of interesting. They're actually ahead of schedule, at least they were, because of weather conditions have been so good until here recently. These schools are going to open, and we have to keep moving forward. And I think Dr. McFarland's mention of it's really always every student at a time. So when there are special circumstances or issues, the team in student and family and community services always addresses those appropriately with consistency, so to make sure that people are always treated fairly, but also with understanding about where families are going to be. Does that answer your question?
A little bit, Dr.
Okay.
Logan. Could I add a follow-up question to that for you? Do you think our families will be able, especially our students, I'm really talking about here, with remediation, be able to catch up to be ready for these pathways?
Well,
Because of,
yeah.
just not having that contact. Right now, we're actually having contact with students, in the schools now, so we're
Sure.
assessing them, but, we don't really know where they're at. I don't know when we will find out where they're currently at moving forward.
Well, I think that's separate from this plan. The looking at where students are in terms of their academic, where they are in terms of their academics, is something that all schools are currently doing. We certainly will administer our MAP assessment at the end of the term, and we have a plan to bring our students who are remote in as well, so that they can also be tested as long as their parents agree to do that. When and our team is about to transition to the next group, the thing with if you think about our incoming ninth graders, so ninth graders are always at risk. That's just part of their profile because of their age, and because it's a pretty significant transition from a very sheltered, usually middle and elementary experience to a lot of freedom. So this current ninth grade class that will enter will have some other challenges in that they've spent 2 years, their 2 prior years, with interrupted education. So sometimes you'll hear an educational term, it's called SLIFE, it's students with limited or interrupted formal education. And usually this refers to students who have perhaps transitioned from another country. But for our students now, it's all of our students. All of our students have had some interrupted formal education. So as we think about our ninth graders and the things that ninth graders need as they transition, which the team is going to talk about, the 9 kind of areas, the essential 9 things that our ninth graders need, there is even more urgency There is around making sure that we provide some pretty significant structures to include summertime where they will attend Jump Start, so they will have an opportunity to transition, and to make sure that they are connected to their high school experience and have structures for them. So.
Can I, Ms. Cracky?
I also want to note all the difficulty and all the work and hours that went into some of those graphs and slides and things. They were just really, really outstanding. I don't know that anyone anywhere would do anything better than they looked. They were just, they're easy to follow, I think. But I have two questions. People ask, well, it tells us they can only move once at the high school level into something else at the high school level. Working with you in that case, hearing what you have said, it sounds to me like you would work with that student if that student wanted to work and go a different direction at that high school, right?
So I can speak to what we do as far as the transfer of schools and.
Well, I'm just talking about within the school, within that one school. And then two, the second part of that would be, what if they suddenly decided they wanted to go to the other school where they had something else going on that they thought they were going to miss out on if they didn't get there? Okay?
So we do work collaboratively, and Mrs. Kratke, as a former school counselor, I can tell you that yes, at the school level, there are a variety of staff that will work with students on their particular situation within that school and what they're studying, and as you're going to hear shortly about those transferable skills. But ultimately, yes, if a student wants to make a transfer in schools, we will work with them to make that transfer.
See, I think that's an important point to point out with all of this, because they are feeling the crush of being limited and not being able to do that. So the flexibility needs to be stated so that it doesn't prevent them from staying in the district or with us. Okay? Thank you. I just want to keep everybody here from not going over the hills.
I just have a really quick question, I think. Is time on bus ever considered when you are determining or creating the transportation plans?
Yes, we have worked with our transportation department, and we did look at having a time on bus. I can tell you, as we looked at it, it was, I believe, an hour and 15 minutes was the longest that we had. But what we do find sometimes is that when a family receives their transportation and they see how long it's going to take, they say, you know what, I am going to make a different choice and I'm going to look at my neighborhood school. So we do work with them on those options as well.
Great, thank you. Any other final questions from colleagues? All right, thank you so much for the presentation. We appreciate it. And next, we have item C1B, update on high school academies and pathways, and we have Dr. Logan presenting for us.
Thank you, Dr. Holman. We are happy to continue sharing information about the evolution of high school programming throughout the Omaha Public Schools. Following more than a year of research, actually a year and a half of research, engagement, and planning these updates, we expand access to advanced classes, enrich learning for students, and more directly connect their time in high school to high-skill, high-wage, and high-demand careers. Well before the pandemic, data showed that change was necessary. Our strategic plan of action calls us to make these updates amid 2 school years disrupted by the pandemic. It is all the more important that we prepare all students for success in high school, beginning with the freshman academy, and elevate their following 3 years before graduation. This time I turn it over to Delane Havlovic and to Susan Christofferson. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening, President Holman, Vice President Erdenberger, members of the board, Dr. Logan, and colleagues. We are pleased to be here this evening, and thank you for the opportunity to share regarding the academies and pathways of Omaha Public Schools. So after the strategic plan of action was presented and approved by the Board of Education last year, we immediately began the process of working through the needs addressed in that plan. In July, we conducted a survey. The survey was distributed through electronic means to over 34,000 parents, students, and staff members that were offered to take that survey. The survey was designed to collect community input on strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats facing our high schools as we established career-connected learning initiatives and their benefits for students, families, staff, businesses, and community partners. Key opportunities were identified as career and civic readiness, preparation, increases in student supports, and increases to the number of advanced programming opportunities that we offer. The opportunities and threats that were realized in the survey are supported in this plan. Our phase timeline of this plan supports adding academic transition supports for freshmen and cohorted supports for students, specifically freshmen as they transition from middle school to high school. Due to the impact of COVID, we shifted to a phased-in approach versus working towards full implementation during the 2021-2022 school year. As we implement the academies and pathways, we are being very deliberate to provide our schools adequate time for implementation. Next year, the class of 2025, our current 8th graders, will start with a freshman academy. Those freshmen will determine their pathway focus to begin their sophomore through senior year, specifically beginning their sophomore year. In some cases, we already have existing pathway or academy programs that next year's sophomores, juniors, and seniors will be able to focus on as well. In years 2, 3, and 4, the class of 2025 will begin any new or existing pathway offerings in the area of focus. This will provide our staff adequate time to implement new courses and enhance current programming. Students in the classes of 2022, 2023, and 2024, that would be our current freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, will have the opportunity to enroll in pathway-specific courses as well without being part of that 4-year academy process that the class of 2025 will be. In year 4, when our current 8th graders are seniors, our first group of pathway or academy concentrators will graduate from our high schools. They will complete a senior capstone experience closely connected to their pathway area. We will work closely with our high schools to regularly update families. The class of 2025 has been placed at greater risk of not graduating due to time interrupted in schooling as 7th and 8th graders, as Dr. Logan talked about just a moment ago, because of the pandemic. This is why it is essential to put strong evidence-based practices into play to start their freshman year for the fall of 2021. We know the disruptions of the pandemic are real. Prior to the pandemic, our data showed that we need to address how we support our 9th graders. Adding to this is the fact that next year's 9th graders have been impacted by the interruptions of their learning again over the past 2 school years as 7th and 8th graders. This disruption calls for urgent and compassionate action to address unfinished teaching and learning, to accelerate student achievement, and support individual needs of students as we move forward. This is why it is essential to put strong evidence-based practices again into play for that freshman year. Our high schools began participating in this work actually 3 years ago. The University of Chicago Success Network conducts training and opportunities to support schools in preparing for this. South High School begun that process 3 years ago. The following year, Northwest, Benson, and Bryan, South also participated with that group again that second year in this extensive training opportunity with the University of Chicago. Currently, we have 3 additional high schools, our other 3, Burke, North, and Central, that are participating currently. The Curriculum and Instruction Support Department is supporting all of our high schools in the transfer of learnings to the Omaha Public Schools through this process, training, and initiative. The University of Chicago's Freshman Success Framework focuses on quality instruction and implementing effective student supports. One of these supports is putting students on teams. This will be our freshman academy work. The experience has reinforced the importance and focus needed to support 9th graders as they transition to high school. The work we do on keeping our freshmen on track sets a strong foundation for their next 4 years and assists in building a culture throughout the high school for high expectations and achieving student success. As indicated, in our review of data, the data reinforced our needs to put in strong evidence-based practice to support a successful transition for our ninth graders into high school. All Omaha Public Schools high schools will be expected to implement the OPS 9 for 9, indicated on this slide on the right side of the screen, which are 9 evidence-based strategies to effectively support the transition into high school. The collaboration of these 9 came from the learnings with the University of Chicago's Freshman Success Network and the work of collaboration through our high school principals. Additionally, career education concentrator data is another point that we'd like to share with you this evening. In the state of Nebraska, students who complete 3 or more courses in a career and technical education sequence graduate at an average rate of 10% higher than those who do not participate in such a program sequence while in high school. When looking at the same data for Omaha Public Schools, that average rate is actually 11% higher than the state average. Omaha Public Schools career education concentrator data also mirrors our district demographic data by schools. According to our strategic plan of action, external curriculum audit conducted by Steel Dynamics, freshmen need a course and supports that will assist them with 6 to 10 years planning that includes college and career planning, as well as consistent information about the opportunities available to them in our own district. Opportunities around those offerings, as well as opportunities around what college and career preparation choices they may have in front of them. When students select and own their own pathway decisions, very important, they are more likely to command better engagement of their work and own the work that they are doing, and really be surrounded around the rigor around those concepts. Relatively well-developed career academies increase students' academic knowledge and skills. It increases the probability that students would attend post-secondary education, and it decreased the need for later remediation in English and the increased probability of graduation for students who are otherwise not likely to even attend a university or a college program. And that is data that was presented to us by the California Policy of Research Commission. We have shared some reference slides at the end of this presentation that you'll be able to take with you as well. Within the Omaha Public Schools, students are required to graduate with 49 credits. Of those 49 credits, 8 of those credits are English, 7 are social studies, 6 are in mathematics, 6 are in science, 4 are in physical education, 1 in human growth and development, as well as 1 in personal finance. That also provides the opportunity for 16 elective credits for graduation. A student has the opportunity actually to select 64 courses throughout their 4 years of high school rather than just the minimum of 49 credits or courses. After graduation requirements are met, there are 15 additional elective opportunities beyond those 16 electives required for graduation. With that, there is plenty of room for choice for all courses that a student may be interested in. And that is really, we've provided you a design sample of what one person's 4-year plan may look like in a high school that includes required courses on the left side. The courses on the far right are their academy or pathway courses, starting with a freshman seminar. And then the courses in green are really their choice electives that come from a variety of opportunities. Focus groups at each of our high schools identified the strengths and opportunities on which this plan was built. Principals were highly engaged in walkthroughs of their buildings and discussions to select the pathways and academies that would be the best fit for their schools. School and district staff worked closely together in collaboration that also included English learners and special education team collaboration as well. The freshman seminar course, part of the freshman academy, is a consistent course for all ninth graders. Students will explore pathway or academy options while learning skills such as time management, organization, and study skills. As a parent of an 8th grader, those are definitely necessary skills in our household. We understand that not all freshmen are ready to lock into a career for their lifetime. This is why all academy and pathway program opportunities focus on transferable skills that will translate to success in college, career, and beyond. For students finding that their first pathway choice is not their best match, they are allowed to switch. Normally that would take place between their sophomore and junior year. The example again shown on the screen between the sophomore through senior years on the far right column shows what it might look like if a student is involved in an entrepreneurship pathway at one of our high schools. In our high schools, each course guide has a description of core graduation requirements, pathway courses, and elective courses. The course guide also contains recommended student organizations, industry certification opportunities, and potential work-based learning experiences that student may be interested in being part of through their high school experience. We also outline dual enrollment opportunities and even careers that they could consider that connect or may be transferable to the skills that they're attaining in that particular pathway or academy. All courses within this plan will be taught by qualified and appropriately certified teachers in their content area. All subject areas will still teach to their adopted standards and instructional materials. There will be opportunities for cross-curricular activities between teachers to embed projects through multiple content areas. But for example, in a geometry class, they will teach the same standards whether they're in an entrepreneurship pathway like this or a pathway in maybe a public health academy or pathway in a different school. The evolution of this work began with a program audit and with an external consultant, Steel Dynamics, as we shared earlier, as part of our strategic plan of action, that highlighted the career-focused programming needed to be updated to better align with industry-specific content, certifications, and student outcomes. These findings challenged and charged us to analyze how to better meet the greater needs of our students in a rigorous sequence of courses, preparing them for their future as well as meeting the needs of the Metro Omaha labor market. The two charts shown on the slide in front of you show the pathway and academy offerings at two of our high schools. The one on the left is Central High School, which will have a pathway model, and the one on the right is North High School, which will have an academy model. During the development process, we discussed the strengths of each school through that walkthrough with the school principal, as well as focus group meetings, and we discussed how we could best support these programs into the development of academies and pathways. Items noted in red, indicated on the charts, are new programs of study. They're a series of at least 4 classes to a school that will be fully implemented over the next 4 years. Items noted in black text already exist at the school and or are being organized into an academy or a pathway structure. Items noted in the green text that you see in front of you are partial academy or pathway programs that will either be reorganized, or will have courses added to their current offerings to provide more depth, more program and intensity, and will align with pathway and academy standards in the future. So those are pathways that we have a bit of work to do to make them go a little bit deeper. School leadership teams are and will consider the staffing of academies or pathway programs as well. We understand this will be done in consideration with opening 2 new high schools, and we also will consider the wishes of our teachers through our regular teacher transfer process that happens each year, coordinated by Human Resources. We want to ensure that schools have staff that is properly credentialed and trained to teach in special program areas that include advanced placement, international baccalaureate, Cambridge, dual enrollment, or even special academy or pathway opportunity offerings like Project Lead the Way. Finally, we are outlining some of the frequently asked questions that we have been presented over the last several weeks. The frequently asked questions are actually posted on our district webpage, but we're going to highlight 4 of them for you today. One of those is, how do students select a career focus as they transition from middle school to high school? Well, actually, the career focus by choosing either a pathway or academy does not actually happen until towards the end of the freshman year, as they're part of the freshman seminar course in their high school. Students will have the opportunity, if they decide that is not the right pathway for them, to change their focus. That's not taken lightly. It happens with conversations between the students, their family, teachers, and school counselors. Normally that change would be expected at the end of the sophomore year if it's going to happen, between the sophomore and junior year. The next question we want to highlight is, what are the benefits of block scheduling? Block scheduling provides us with longer instructional periods that allow students and teachers to go deeper into content in a single session. Longer instructional periods allow for project-based learning. All of our teachers experienced block teaching in remote learning over the last several months. We are going to provide professional development to ensure high quality bell-to-bell instruction is occurring. The third bullet, will students have the opportunity to take electives like AP courses, performing in fine arts, world languages, or be involved in other advanced program opportunities? And that answer is yes. As we illustrated on slide 4, the matrix of the 4-year plan, you could see all of the schools that had the green text or the green shading in them were opportunities to choose electives outside of their pathway opportunity. And finally, will students in the classes of 2022, 2023, and 2024 have the opportunities to be part of the Academy and Pathway programs? We've had several parents come to us, or we've heard from, that have asked, so my son is currently a sophomore, my daughter is currently a junior. Will they have these opportunities as well? And yes, our students will have the opportunities to join either existing or developing a Pathway or Academy courses as we implement those in our schools, as they become available to those students. I did mention that we provided a list of citations for you. These should be in your notes. If you have questions on them, we can talk about any of these as well. And we thank you for providing us the opportunity to share with you this evening.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Questions? Mr. Snow?
Thank you, Dr. Holman. Thank you for the presentation. Is there, I know this is a workshop, is there a way that we could get, I feel like we're just scraping the surface on this. Is there an opportunity to get more in-depth with about these academies and pathways and how we got to here with our consultants, or where we were and how we got here today on these programs and kind of the research? I know there were references here, but I mean, I'm not that smart, and to be honest with you, just over my head with some of this stuff.
So
Well, I'm going to say, we sent the entire board the audit. We sent it on, I think, Thursday or Friday. We sent the audit. We were careful about the audit because the audit has, we talked to real children and staff members, and so it has some names in it, so we were careful about making sure that isn't, but we have sent you, it's about a 22-page document of the audit that includes the data, the focus groups, the walkthroughs, the discussions with school leaders, with teachers, with students, et cetera. And that document that goes really in depth will probably be a great document to take a look at and to understand how we got here. I would also say that because there are 2 existing schools, Benson and Bryan, that have gone through the process to become academy schools, that the district for some time has been going through a process with those particular schools where they determined that that was a model that they wanted to pursue, and went through the formal process, because in order to become an academy school, you go through a process with the National Career Academy Council to become academy schools. So we've been doing that the district has been doing that for some time with those particular ones, and now we're adding 2 additional academy schools.
Is there a department that leads that, or is it?
Pardon?
Who's responsible for leading the implementation? Obviously, you're the superintendent, but who is the?
I'm looking at Mrs. Christofferson. Mrs. Christofferson's team, Mr. Havlovic's team are the lead on that. Prior, it was the individual who was here prior when those other 2 schools became academy schools. I believe both of them have at least one model academy that has been recognized for having model status for their programming. And one of the things, I was at Benson recently, so I got to be in the welding with the construction, is that they, I want to say did it start in 16, 17, or 17, 18? Maybe
15, 16.
Say it again.
I think 15, 16.
15, 16. And, they've been evolving over time. And, obviously some pandemic interruption, but have really worked really hard to develop those with just kind of like a school support. So with systemic support, we're really excited about them being able to develop them more fully and add additional academies so that all their students can be a part of it. I think it's important for us to note, too, that schools got to select whether they wanted to be academy or pathway schools. That was something that they determined. They also determined their own programming. And that it was really interesting to see in which direction that they went. They obviously had some technical assistant in terms of knowing things that were going to be available for them. And we continue to work to try to expand their thinking about things that are possible. So currently, we are looking at adding air traffic control, either as a part of transportation and logistics or with our aviation academy. So there will still be opportunities for development, and these are obviously high skill, high wage, high demand jobs where students can transition from the program here to the University of Nebraska Omaha program. They have a really good aviation program there, and then transition to work right here in the community.
So, but you opened up my mind to just two more questions, and I'll leave this alone. So with that, how do you evaluate these programs to see if you're actually meeting where you're trying to take these students? And then on the other piece with that is not just evaluating students on where they're at, who's teaching these? Are just our regular teachers teaching them, or we're giving them, or we're, telling our counselor to go learn how to do aviation and come back? My friend's a counselor. I was just,
not at all. We actually, our aviator at Burke is from the United States Air Force.
But teach these classes, you're going to have to get a teaching
Right.
certificate.
Right.
So
I'm going to have Ms. Christopherson answer that. But program evaluation, I can have Mr. Scott Schmidt-Bonnie. I mean, obviously, graduation rate which is what Mr. Havlovic talked about, is the most important capstone for evaluation. But Mr. Scott Schmidt-Bonnie.
I'll just say, Mr. Snow, one of the things that we make sure that we take a look at with the programming is with academies, there's actual national standards of practice that we work really hard to make sure that those are put in place when they work with the schools on academy development. There are key standards that need to happen in order for an academy to be recognized nationally. And as Dr. Logan mentioned, we've had a couple of our schools actually have national models, whereas people from the outside are coming in, taking tours, doing focus groups, talking with students, and they have to meet the criteria. We've also had schools who have embarked on it to get started to better understand, and they were not ready. And they get that feedback too, and then we continue to work with that school as it evolves and develops. And as far as working with staff, we actually have staff members who are certified in a multitude of different things. And so one of the things that we'll take a look at is how can we tap into the talents of some of our staff, and what type of professional learning do we need to then focus in to support our teachers in moving forward to transition to teaching something different. We also are working on, as a part of what we've presented before, that business engagement model. We have amazing business partners, and we're looking at growing what that looks like so that they can also give us key insight to what are some of the things that we need to ensure that we're putting into our curriculum and utilizing their talents and skills to help provide business shadowing even for our teachers to help develop some of those skills too. So it's kind of a complementary pieces in organizing to support our staff in that transition as well.
I appreciate that piece there. Before you go, just a compliment on training the staff that we have, but you've been in the district for a long time. You understand, sometimes if you just have one staff that is an expert in it and they are not there, you're no longer doing that magnet. Are you still that program because they were the program?
I guess I just want to add that one of the things that we've been moving away from in the district for the past several years is we were developing courses based on teacher interest. And one of the things that we recognize is that when that teacher leaves, they take their expertise with them. And then somebody else comes in to teach that class, and they don't have that knowledge or expertise. So as we're looking at this as an entire system, it's helping us to strengthen our inner working relationships amongst schools, and how are we helping to develop whole programs versus just individual interests.
As we look at our academy models and the pathways that'll come along with them, I think it starts with engagement, the engagement of our students in the coursework and the offerings being provided to them, and that's measured a couple different ways. We measure behavioral engagement through attendance and disciplinary type situations to see our students showing up to school. Are they finding the classroom a conducive environment for them learning new material? Additionally, for just about half a decade, slightly over, we've been measuring engagement using a measure that looks at cognitive and emotional engagement. Cognitive is the stimulating nature of the material. It's real-world applications for that student as they're looking forward into their life. And the emotional taps into, do I get to do interesting things with my peers? Do I get to enjoy classes that I might not otherwise get to enjoy? And so we don't expect engagement for engagement's sake. We know that student engagement begets more teacher engagement and so on and so forth. And so we would also expect that engagement and better attendance and all that goes along with it to matriculate into better course performance in the short term, better assessment performance a little bit long term. And then as we reach out, as we are now, to students after they've graduated in our graduate follow-up, we look to see, as we've collected now for well over a decade, kind of that our students are matriculating into some of these careers, which, as has been mentioned, that isn't to expect that everyone who goes through a welding program necessarily will become a welder in the future. I weld at least once a week, though I count things during the day. But those skills are transferable, and they are also beneficial to students even if they do not attend a career path in that direction. So we'll be measuring it across that span.
Is that data that is going to be ongoing presented to the board and the community as we go through this? Because if I'm a parent and I'm trying to figure, or if I'm a student, I'm trying to figure out if the juice is worth the squeeze on this programmer going into it, could I go in there and see the data or see that the district is updating this data and where we are? Now, I know for an example, the strategic plan we did centuries ago, the data that was presented wasn't always able to come up with the program. And I'm just saying, will this data be ongoing throughout the entire process, or is it like, now you graduate, do you have a job? Do you see what I'm saying? Are we evaluating these students and this program throughout so you can make those changes and not wait till the end and know that you didn't really hit your mark? Or can we?
Well, you can certainly do that by understanding how students want to engage, or if students want to engage, whether or not we are offering the right things. So I think there are implementation measures and outcome measures. The outcome measure that's going to be the most important is going to be graduation rate. But it's a lagging indicator, so you don't see it until, the kids are gone. But what you can see is whether or not students are doing well, and that's something we can always look at. We can look at their attendance, their behavior, and their credit attainment, and to see how they're progressing along. We can do comparison for children in different kinds of strands, or different kinds of academies and different pathways, and make comparisons along that, as long as we are controlling for some other kinds of variables. Did I have that right, Mr. Scotch-Mabani? Just want to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm assuming you have to be accredited on an annual basis or something like that with these programs.
Mrs. Christopherson talked a little bit about that. So if you think about the International Baccalaureate, and I'm just thinking about my dear colleague back here, Dr. Sturba, when she became a middle years program, it wasn't she just declared, I want to be a middle years international baccalaureate program. She had to go through a process of applying, and then a process of being designated by International Baccalaureate that her school met criteria and along the way in order to do that. The same with the Career Academy kinds of designations.
Susan mentioned the national standards of practice that we have 2 model schools on. We also have Rule 47 as a Nebraska state model for evaluating career academies, and that really happens first. So if we're meeting model status nationally, obviously we're meeting it statewide, but that is also our gauge for looking at our programs at a local and state level, and some of our performance indicators in and around our Perkins dollars and career and technical education national concentrators that go, are pushed from the
So you
state
get
to the national
evaluated
level.
the same as the IB program,
Right.
because that was a rigorous process at Central. They put me in that room for a couple hours and just grilled me. I wasn't even part of the program, but they wanted a board member to grill. So thank you. I appreciate the work and effort that's gone in it. This is an organic process, and I think it's something that's different, but it's something that's needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snow. Mrs. Cassidy?
Thank you, President Holman. I think, first of all, thanks for the presentation. Great effort, and I know it's been a lot of work. For those of us that have been on the board for a while, we've had the privilege to see firsthand, and this is, I think, our second presentation, small presentation on this, so thank you for coming back again. This is so vast that I think the questions could keep going on all night. But those of us that were on the board previously, we've gotten to see firsthand the real engagement that the principals had and the students. Wasn't there a room that we also had? I can't remember what you called it. It's like
Our data room. We went upstairs to our data room so that we could, the board was able to see all kinds of data, to include graduation rate, ninth grade completion rate, but also to look at where we had interest in programs and we had less interest in programs. So it was a pretty tremendous,
yeah.
I hate to look at you, whatever, because it's like hours and hours of getting that
I
data.
only
up
walked in
there,
there once, but I wanted to call it Command Central.
No, but in addition to our team viewing it, also we had our principals come,
Yes.
and our principals brought back their school teams, so they were able to, it was not just an exercise for us to look at it, but also to set the expectation around this is just the way we want to be able to look at things, to Mr. Snow's point, to be looking at data regularly, to be looking at all kinds of data, to make decisions about not just things feel good, and to address the personality issue. This is not about any particular personality. This is about what needs to happen for children and how we support our children as they finish their schooling with us. One of my colleagues recently, and I think we've shared that we want to talk about students, what they got when they left us. So if you think about the portrait of a graduate, and one of the things is we want students to be able to point to, these are the skills, transferable and otherwise, that I got as a result of being here. So we talked about children, and I'm thinking about one of the Frodimas children who was at South, and meeting that student and him being completely bilingual at the end of his dual language time, and I actually met him as a junior. And think about my colleague's child who was telling me, this particular colleague, their child is going to graduate from college this year, finishing a 5-year program in 4 years because they left us with enough credits to be a sophomore when they entered. And that's what the Omaha Public Schools can offer our young people. It's extraordinary. You think about kids who can leave us and have enough flight simulation hours that they can become pilots. I mean, we have all kinds of opportunities, and what this, the systemization of high school programming, I got lucky and I landed in a school that had a lot of programming, but that the district was thoughtful about having something available for all children, is where we are trying to live as a district. It's a huge lift, and I have to again commend Susan and Delane for their leadership of continuing this process with their school leaders, meeting all kinds of hours, days, even on weekends in the summertime, which I think is not good, but they did, to make sure that this continued even during a pandemic, so that we could have the intersectionality of high school programmings with our student assignment plan. because one of the things that Casey and Annie, Dr. McFarland and Mr. Hughes pressed us on was, are we going to have our high school programming ready for when we do our student assignment plan, because we want families to make a choice, not just geographically about what they, where they're going, but also programmatically to understand that these are the opportunities that they're going to have. And I really appreciate the slide where you can see all the programs in your zone, and then you can, the pointy thing down where you could see, I don't even know what to call it, but the arrow, I guess that's an arrow, right? Arrow that went down to see where you when you got your +1. So when the team was looking at the configuration of schools, that was also a factor to make sure there was a lot of variety in every zone. That's something that's really, really important. The time on a school bus is important to us. Less time on a school bus is better, more time is worse. So we really wanted to make sure that families didn't have to travel. If you want to travel far, that's okay. But there's a lot of evidence to support that shorter travel times equate to better outcomes for students. So that's the work that this team, did with a whole bunch of people to include their school leaders. And finally, I'm going to end a little bit on a personal note. As a high school principal, my school became an academy school, and this is how I learned about the academies I got. I got an email. These are your academies, and that influenced. And I've shared that with our team. That influenced how we went about. I mean, we would have done it the right way anyway, but that influenced from the leader. Really, was really important that schools engage, that we don't just say, here you go, that the schools, and like I said, we were surprised at some of the things that schools elected to do, but we certainly supported them because they certainly connected to high skill, high wage, high demand here in Omaha and Nebraska more broadly, and represented things that were academically engaging and rigorous for our young people. So it's personal a little bit in terms of making sure that people have autonomy to the degree that it's appropriate to make sure that they are vested in what happens in their schools and with their school children and their school communities.
Thank you. I appreciate you talking a little more about the process and engagement with that Command Central room. I will say, though, I have to address this. I have heard nothing negative about programming. I think for the most part, people are teachers have reached out that they find it refreshing, the different types of programs that will now be offered. I mean, some very innovative things like the AI and some of the more technological things that maybe they haven't seen before at their children's schools. I've heard nothing negative about the programming itself. However, there are two things that I keep getting from parents and teachers, and I, quite frankly, don't know how to address them because I don't know the answers. I think you addressed one of them this evening very well in your slide about the Freshman Academy. Several parents are very worried and have reached out, and teachers as well, that they feel that the academy is forcing their student to day one pick something and go into it, and that's it. And I think you've addressed that very well, that academy is not at all. It is more of almost an orientation, and it's a toolbox that's going to help them their entire way through high school. It is not all about just the programming and what they're going to end up as adults and what they're going to go into, college or a trade or whatever. So I think you've addressed that very well. Hopefully people understand that, because that's been a large concern I know that I've gotten from a lot of constituents. Secondly, I think we all have been hearing this second comment. I know at our last board meeting we heard several of our public comment folks who graciously let us know that they are worried about block scheduling. I've had several concerned teachers. I represent South, and I've had several teachers from South, and of course Central as well, reach out about block scheduling. I don't quite understand why block scheduling is such a difficult piece. I asked my high school student, what do you think about block scheduling? What do you think about going to block scheduling? And she was like, whatever, it'll be fine. It's a change, Mom. I won't go to 9 classes. I'll have I won't go every day to that class. That could be a good thing. I mean, she kind of looked at it both ways. I guess for teachers, though, why is it such a concern? What is it about block scheduling that is making some of these teachers so apprehensive? I think some of the things that we've heard is that they're going to lose programming, they're going to lose AP, the IB program is going to go away, we're not going to have dual language, and you've addressed that on your last slide, that those programs are not going away. Can you kind of address block scheduling? I don't know who that question goes to, but I know it's kind of a tough one, but I really myself want to understand why it is such a concern.
Yes, well, I will say for sure with block scheduling, it is an evolution of how you teach. It's how to think about what you're doing from that bell-to-bell instructional time that you have been allocated. And so it's really an opportunity, as we mentioned earlier, to go deeper into what it is that you're teaching. It's a change. And whenever you're doing a change, it does make people feel uncomfortable, unsure. And one of the things that's important to us, and we have been actually working with schools since the pandemic hit last March, and we started talking even about scheduling and how we were going to do remote and moving to a block, that two of our schools, Central and South, asked us, don't have us do this year. We need a little bit more time. And in those conversations with South and Central over this past year and the evolution of their conversations, we actually received some really positive feedback on where they're at as a school in their conversations, because we have been meeting on master scheduling with a national consultant as well to help every school as they develop and implement programming. How do they make that work? And so we're walking hand in hand with Central and South during that process, and also, well, actually all 7 of our high schools, to be honest, but also Central and South. We've also had additional conversations because the principals have asked to meet additional time with the consultant, and we have provided that additional time. I also know that our principals and leaders of those schools are familiar with block scheduling. They have been around in the district from the original implementation of block scheduling back in the 90s, and have experience in teaching in it themselves and also providing professional learning. And we also have put together some professional learning that we are looking forward to continue to help and support teachers and schools through this transition. Block scheduling, actually it's just not block scheduling, it's about effective teaching for an entire block, whether it's a 45-minute or a 90-minute. We want all of the minutes that we are given with students to be used effectively with evidence-based pedagogy. And so it is a time and an effort to think about how we're teaching and how do we engage our students, especially during, it gets a little bit, there's that direct instruction time, there's that modeled and shared time. We want to spend more time in the modeled and, not in the modeled and shared, I'm sorry, in the shared and guided time to actually provide descriptive feedback and give students more time to collaborate and have conversations with the teachers and with each other as they're working on some projects that sometimes it's really hard to get to in such a short period of time in a class. I think about, sorry, I guess I could go on. I think effective instruction is just so important, and how do we help teachers navigate through that change and make everyone as comfortable as they can. As a person who had the opportunity to teach initially in a 45-minute day schedule when I first started teaching and be a part of the evolution into a block schedule, I would have never changed back. The things I was able to do in my English classroom that I was not able to do in a 45-minute period was very effective in the projects that we were able to do and collaborate interdisciplinary-wise, even along. So I don't know, a little lengthy, but I hope that helps.
No, that really helps. I think personally, I feel the same way. I look at, I mean, and obviously I'm not an educator, but I look at a block schedule and I think about my own children that come home and want help with math and I'm struggling to help them. And I think, why can't you just get more time in class? I can't help you. So I feel like block lends to more one-on-one time after maybe instruction is over, lab time is over, maybe there's time for that one-on-one instruction so parents like me don't have to help with math, please. Thank you. But I feel like block, you're right, change is hard. And I think that might be part of the apprehension that we're hearing. And believe me, it's not all teachers. I think we've all gotten positive feedback. But change is hard, absolutely. I appreciate the answer, though, and I know it's on a lot of people's minds, so just had to ask the question. Thank you.
Ms. Snipes?
Thank you, and thank you for putting together all of this information for us, because I know there are a lot of questions, and it sounds to me like, because I've gotten a lot of questions too, and it sounds to me like what people are concerned about when it comes to block scheduling is young people be able to retain information, because it seems like you get a lot more in a shorter period of time and maybe in between classes, and then of course an attention span issue. But you're going to be gathering like feedback and different things to really watch that, so I appreciate that. I have other questions too, and some of these are questions that I've been getting. Some of them are my own as well. As far as schools with block scheduling, how will that work as far as selecting electives, different types of electives?
Just as it does for any other type of a schedule experience, you have 64 options in your courses. One of the things that Delane talked about earlier, that during your time within the Omaha Public Schools, you have 64 classes that you can take, and your options and possibilities are still there when a student goes to decide.
Thank you. And then another question I get often is, what is the difference between this and a magnet program?
I might let you chime in on the magnet piece. But
I was going to, so the magnet is a federal definition for a program that is for the purposes of desegregation. So it has a federal definition that is usually a part of a larger desegregation plan, which I believe that this one was at the time that it was implemented. The difference is that in a choice system, which we have a choice system, people can choose high schools. If everything isn't a choice, then you don't really have a choice. You have a default and some excellent options. And so the reason that we systematized the high school programming academies and pathways was that so that all schools have some high quality programming that children and families want.
Thank you. Okay. You mentioned earlier, you gave, I think it was some data really. You said students who take 3 or more courses in can you say that again? I was trying to write it down, but I didn't get it. I just want that for my own personal.
Sure. Students who take 3 or more courses in a sequence and they're known as a career and technical education concentrator. National or state data shows that they are 10% more likely to graduate high school on time. Our own district demographic data shows that they are actually 11% more likely to graduate on time if they're in one of those programs.
Okay. And then you talked about the transferable skills, which I appreciate, and also thank you for the focus on H3, the high skill, high wage, high demand. When you talk about those transferable skills, can you maybe just give maybe an example of a few transferable skills you're talking about?
So I think like our aviation program at Burke is one example. So maybe you're interested in aviation engineering. You might transfer that skill into maybe an engineering opportunity doing maybe architecture in the future. Or another one might be in computer science, for example. Let's say you're interested in a pathway involving game design and application development. You might be able to take that lens of game design and transfer that to a job where you're making 6 figures developing software programs for one of our leading companies in Omaha. A couple examples, of transferable skills that might work that way.
Thank you. And then you also talked about some work-based learning activities. Would you have some examples of those?
Numerous activities of those. So we would love every one of our seniors to have a meaningful work-based learning experience, specifically an internship. We would love our students to, and that's why we need such a strong group of business partners to help support our schools and really connect with our schools, not only from the development of curriculum and giving us input on equipment and what it's like to really get speaking opportunities, what it's like to be in those career experiences, but when those seniors, when those pathway or academy students become seniors, they're in their final year or semester of their program, nothing would be more powerful than having them go work at a software engineering company and putting that application to real and oftentimes even paid use by that particular company. So that's the ideal. Other opportunities would be job shadows. Having even our sophomores go out and maybe do a one-day job shadow. Benson High has really emphasized the concept of lunch and learns, where they'll have a speaker either come in, or now they'll do it remotely, maybe from a healthcare profession, nursing, and they'll talk about opportunities maybe in physical therapy to a group of nursing students, so they can see there's more to nursing than just the typical nursing things that you and I might think of when we hear that term.
Okay, then final question. Is there some place where someone can go and see a description of each of the academies?
The district webpage that has the academies and pathways on it, there is a list of each school and the pathway and academy programs for those. So that's what we would refer them to at this point in time. If there's a specific question about one of those pathway or academies, like what do these courses look like, we'd encourage students or families to go to their high school and look at their course guide for a particular program, or consult with school leadership at one of those schools if they're still making decisions on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Snipes. Mr. Head?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it. So as a new board member, I kind of feel like I'm coming in at the fourth quarter when the ball's already at the 10. So if we could back up a little bit to square one. So from the beginning in putting this program together, how did we engage staff, parents, students, the community? I know the audit talked about doing focus groups at the high schools. You had mentioned the survey, and hopefully we engage business at some point. If we're creating these pathways to put people into business, especially businesses in the community. So can you just talk about that a little bit?
Sure, and we didn't talk about the survey earlier, I know, where we did have parents, staff members, including teachers, school leadership team members. We even had a large number of high school students that completed that survey as well to provide us input as well. And we had community input, business partners and such that completed that as well. We also did focus groups at each one of our high schools where we had, and they were blind focus groups led by external consultants. We had a group in each school of students, leadership team members, teachers, and school counselors. So those 4 focus groups really helped shape what we learned, or maybe some of the strengths and weaknesses through their eyes of what's going on in those schools as well. Over the last, I'll say 6 months, Susan, we've had several engagement sessions. We do follow-up sessions with our school leadership teams that include curriculum specialists, oftentimes counseling teams, to really help them shape the work around what is in those academy and pathway programs, so what those courses look like. My team is meeting with schools this week again, just to see where they're at on planning their courses, what needs they have, just to make sure we're on the same page with standards, the models for the national standards of practice that we talked about, really helping them engage in those conversations all along. So like Dr. Logan said, we're really not throwing these academies and pathways at schools. We're really trying to be thoughtful and having two-way conversations on what the schools really need. Susan and I in district operations are doing walkthroughs of each school this month and next month, just to make sure we don't have any gaps in space or design that we need to really think about as well. What did I miss?
All right, and then so specifically with the business community, and I know you mentioned it a little bit, but have we brought in any businesses specifically and said, okay, we want this pathway or we want this academy, help us come up with programming to fit it that would prepare these students for what you need?
Yeah. So Benson High, I'm going to talk about how they started their academies and pathways 5 to 6 years ago. And we are at the stage right now where they were at in the early conversations where they're just putting together their advisory boards for each of their three academies: the health, the business and entrepreneurship, and the design and construction. So they have 3 independent boards. So those boards really did not specifically told us what to teach, but what is most essential for our students to walk out of high school with as it aligns to the portrait of a graduate, but also what do they need to walk into a business and do an internship, or what do they need to be successful in that particular industry. It gives us another lens of how we do it. We've tried to engage many times, as often as we can, our teachers with those business partners as well, to maybe do a one-day teacher job shadow, where they can go into that business for half a day or a full day, or even a week during the summer, and explore, what it's like to sit next to an accountant, or what it's like to, to work in a engineering firm for a particular period of time. So we really rely on our business partners to do that. We are estimating that we'll need 150 to 200 business partners to really help support all 7, soon to be 9 of our high schools in their pathways and academies. Counting the number of pathways and academies we have, really having an advisory board for each one of those is quite a process, and we want partners that are going to engage with us along the way. I know from working with business partners as well, it brings energy to them when they get to really interact with kids and really share their experience with kids. So we want to make sure that we're providing those experiences on a two-way street, that it's really a partnership as well.
Okay. And then I remember one of the slides from the last time we met on this in January had kind of a timeline, and I remember this spring and summer there was significant, I think there was 2 or 3 blocks that were dedicated to engaging businesses, working with them, putting programming together. So I guess what's the plan then there? I'd imagine you already have kind of partners targeted that we're going to bring in, but.
So we are engaging in conversations with the Greater Omaha Chamber of Commerce to help us form. So we're going to have 3 different levels of advisory or business engagement throughout our school district. The first level is really the assist level. It's on the ground. They are there to engage with our schools. They will be in meetings either via Teams or in our schools, providing that input, being guest speakers and such. We also have a district level advisory board as well that brings the chairs of those individual advisory boards together to help us provide kind of some district consistency, so we can share with them and they can share with us what we need as well. And then finally, we haven't established it yet. We're looking at starting this this spring, is to have the highest level or an advocacy group of business partners that are really out there to help us spread the message about business partners and engagement. Like I said, that is our next step of business engagement, but we're really wanting to engage, about a dozen people that can really spread the word to businesses and to their business communities about really making these positive business connections go on in our schools.
Okay. And then on the parent engagement piece, and I know we talked about the survey a little bit again, and maybe it's my fault kind of being the new kid on the block and not necessarily understanding what the survey was, but I kind of came into it believing that the survey was asking parents, specific parts of the Academies and Pathways programming. So, do you agree with having academies with pathways? Do you agree with certain programming? And then I read the survey, and the questions were, as a SWOT analysis, right? What are we doing well? What can we improve upon? How do we communicate? Stuff like that. And so I look at that, and it's a night and day difference between what I thought the engagement was and what it actually was. So what have we done, once the programming actually came together to engage with parents and get their feedback?
I guess the thing that we have always considered as we take a look at programming, as we're designing programming, we're working and focusing in on the students and what it is that we can do to ensure that the students are ready for that next level of their post-secondary experience. So in choosing programming, we are taking a look at what it would be to be high skill, high wage, in demand, and we took a look at the job that the Nebraska Department of Labor, and what are those some options and opportunities that we want to make sure that we are providing our students to ensure what will help them with skills for that next level. So as far as when we are developing programming and some of those types of engagement conversations, it's really keeping the student in mind of what it is that we want to make sure that we're providing for them when they leave the Omaha Public Schools. I don't know if
Okay.
there's a,
No, and I appreciate that, but I also didn't hear the word parent in your response. So are we planning on doing any outreach to parents to see kind of what they expect for their students or what they'd like to see their schools look like?
I think when we took a look at the surveys and what it was providing us might not be a specific program, but what are the skills that they're wanting their students to attain during their experience with the Omaha Public Schools, and that's the piece that I believe we were taking away from it.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. And so then, real quick, I had a couple other questions. So, going back to the slide that you had of the kind of generic schedule. So, in the academies and pathways, then it seems like all this really adds is it's one course per semester per year. So it's not like the programming is going to dominate everything the student does every day that they're in school. Is that correct?
It's very correct, yes.
Okay. And so as far as the impact it has on available AP courses, electives, stuff like that, is that going to change?
If there's a demand for an AP course in a school, the opportunity will still be there. We'll still have, and we're actually adding advanced level programming in several of our schools with our Cambridge model, looking to add more dual enrollment opportunities. We're always looking for more AP opportunities, either through the teachers that can teach them or the opportunities that are coming through the College Board. So no, we're not shrinking any advanced programming opportunities for our students.
Okay. And it sounded like it was the same for electives. It's everything that's currently there is still going to be available, and you can kind of pick and choose what you want to do outside of your academy, your pathway.
Many global elective opportunities will still be there. African American history will be part of our social studies electives. Creative writing will likely be part of our English ELA electives. There may be some consolidating of maybe some career education opportunities. I'm thinking, for example, in a business pathway, we'll probably still have accounting and marketing as an elective opportunity in all of our high schools. But there may be, if we had like an Academy of Finance program that did not have high enrollment, that's kind of been a legacy program that was on the way out, we're cleaning up some of those opportunities so those teachers can be used to go deeper in the areas of focus in that school.
Okay. And then I know one of the questions that I've gotten a lot, and I think we've talked about it a little bit already, but just to kind of bring it up in another way. If, and I think I'd asked you guys this the first time we presented this as well. For the kid who doesn't necessarily have an idea what they want to go into, what pathway they want to follow, what options are there for just the traditional liberal arts education if say I don't fit directly into I think at 156 and IDA we've got health and business or maybe two of the options. So what if I want to do both? Is there kind of a create your own pathway option, so to speak?
So we'll ask our students to still pick, one area of focus to really focus on, but we'll have some students that may have like a double, think about a double major in college. Same might be very true here where they may do like behavioral science electives and really complete another pathway in that, but they're also focused maybe on an entrepreneurship or a marketing pathway as well. So yes, very possible. I could see at Central High, for example, that we might have a student that's engaged in band and chorus, and they're really completing two different performing and fine arts pathways. I mean, they can fill in those other electives, pretty much however they choose. And, by course request nature, they're, fill their schedules as they request those courses.
All right. And then I see the senior capstone part of it. So what exactly is the senior capstone, and what happens if a student doesn't complete it? Obviously, we don't, not graduate the kid. So what happens if they don't do it, and what do they get if they do?
So it somewhat will depend on the pathway the student is in as to what that senior capstone experience may be. If you caught the news clip this weekend about Burke High and they're doing their plane that they sent off, that likely could be a capstone type experience. It might be part of a class that they're in during that senior year, but they're making something come to fruition that they've been working on for the prior 3 years in the program. I could see another at Benson High, for example, a student that's in the nursing pathway or one of the healthcare pathways they might get their CNA license as part of their senior capstone experience, or even a dual enrollment credential during that senior experience. Not that we're saying CNA is the stopping point, but we want that student to take that and really build on that as they go into college, career, and beyond. So it's really somewhat, we're still designing those in some cases for the different pathways and opportunities that are there, and some are very specific to the types of programming that the student chooses to engage in.
All right.
One of them that we're looking at for design and construction is actually our students building a house. So that, not every student is going to be able to do that, but it would be a collaborative effort for a final project that they would be working toward, and the different components of that.
Okay. And then the final question that I've been getting a lot from parents, teachers, students is, obviously this year's been tough on everybody. We've asked a lot of our teachers, our families are stressed, our kids are stressed. With the summer school plan, we know we're going to be asking a lot of our teachers this summer, and catching students up through credit recovery is going to be a long-term, several year plan. So is there an option, I guess, to press pause, or?
I guess it goes back to some of the additional opening conversation that we had in the importance of if we actually paused, we were actually going to be implementing all to start this upcoming school year, and we've actually scaled that work completely back, and we're only going to be focusing in on Freshman Academy for next year for our incoming 9th graders, because we do recognize that there was no way to implement and put every piece into play for the start of the 21-22 school year. And so we did put a pause on that, but also recognizing the importance of, we need to make sure that our students are engaged. Part of the feedback, as you'll read, as we visit classrooms, and what does that look like even prior to the pandemic, was sometimes the lack of engagement of our students in our classrooms. And so how do we work to make sure that when our students are back in more than just 5 days a week, but they are back in session and all of that, that we are providing engaging opportunities for them each and every day that they're coming into our schools.
Okay. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Head. Mr. Thielen?
Thank you, Dr. Holman. For me, I think there's a little bit of a tension. I think, a lot of the early conversations were around career pathways and sort of the importance of connecting students to career. And it's clearly the data around career and technical education is and graduation rates is very clear. So for me, I'm having a little trouble kind of fitting in how the other pathways around maybe the arts fit into that, and what the kind of maybe separate justification backup research is for those academies and pathways.
We, as a district, we wanted to take a look at, I use this and generationally maybe, building a fame, like really giving students an opportunity to dive even deeper into the performing arts area that we hadn't really had a chance to do. We hadn't really gone that deep. And so it was taking a look at some of those interests, but also having conversations with principals on what it is that they felt was important to their school and their community and their culture. And those were some of the things that were mentioned. And so we helped to support those interests as well, and tried to make a balance.
So, and when we look at, going back to Mr. Snow's kind of opening question about metrics, when we look at what's our real, what will we know where these will have been successful? Do we have a percentage increase in graduation that we're looking for to know this is our mark that we're trying to hit?
One of the academic goal for our strategic plan is to increase the graduation rate. So that is our primary, working to make sure that that happens. And as all of the other metrics that have been talking about, how we make sure that we're keeping our students. So hopefully our attendance and engagement and all of those other things are taken into consideration as well.
And I think I just have one kind of clarifying question. So the pathways and academies, the kind of broad selections or categories that are listed for each school, those really are broad categories. There are really pathways inside of those, right? And so I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. You'd pick something inside of that category, one of those more specific groupings, and that's where you try to get your class concentrations.
And Delane, please jump in here. So if we look at specifically one of the academies, so design and construction at Bryan High School, there's 3 pathways inside of there. So construction, and then there would be a series of courses that build upon each other that a student would take. Or if you're going into architectural design, that's your pathway. And you're going to take a series of courses that scaffold and build upon for that student experience during their time that they take that succession of courses.
I think, going back to this example again, the entrepreneurship pathway, and I'm thinking Central High has the leadership pathway, and entrepreneurship is included in that pathway as well. So they'll take principles of business marketing and management, accounting, marketing, and then a final entrepreneurship class along with their senior capstone class their senior year. The teaching as a profession pathway is at Central, and that leadership pathway as well. It's actually at every one of our high schools, but they will take, in the first year, they are taking an intro to education and then a adolescent/child development course and building on curriculum and instructional design during their junior year, and then into their senior year, we want them actually in our schools doing practicums like they would if they were an undergraduate education student. So both exploring leadership, very different components of leadership, but different opportunities in and around those that, will lead to transferable skills to the career that they might be interested in while in high school.
Thank you. I think the last question that I have is are there examples of, or is there data even about schools, districts that have sort of implemented this for their whole district, and are we comparable, I guess is the first question.
So there is data, and I'm going to go to my references. Sorry, I'm going to move it around here quite a bit. So one thing I would really encourage you to look at is the Coalition for Career Development, Career Readiness for All white paper. It really does get into impact around academies and pathways in some of those particular areas. We have also done a lot of looking at Nashville, not 100% identical demographics to that of Omaha Public Schools, but they have gone to a wall-to-wall academy model and have seen great academic success from their students as well. And again, they've had a lot of the same non-negotiables or experiences around either academies or pathways that we're looking at as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thielen. Ms. Cracky?
I want to go back to something that you said in the presentation, and it isn't on the sheet identified at Burke as such, but I was asked that question about engineering itself last night. I see air and space, and you said with engineering, so that must mean that you're combining that with that, but it isn't listed here. I think it'd be great to have it listed here, because I didn't know that when I answered the question. And the person really wanted their child to have the opportunity for engineering and at that school. So it is there, but reading this, I would never know that.
So I would encourage people to go out to the Omaha Public Schools, our website, and it actually has a listing. And so under Air and Space Academy, there's a flight pathway, an aircraft mechanics, and then an aerospace engineering pathway within that. And so I hope that that document might help to provide a few more details about what an academy and then what are the pathways within the academy.
So we really need to encourage them to look further on the web than to just look here.
Yes,
Because
there's another.
This could be very misleading to someone looking for that.
There's another. Yes, and so if we can we'll talk to see if we can maybe easier for it to be located.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Cracky. Ms. Erdenberger?
Thank you. Hi. There's two parts to what's going on here this evening. One is the positive effect that this is going to have on the education of our kids and their engagement with their own education and all of that. And I feel very confident in all of the work and the research and the results that we can look forward to, so on and so forth. There's another part that I'm just going to put in the proverbial parking lot, which is exactly how we got here, because I think that we might have had, a little bit of an interruption in the input department. But the end result is something I feel very strongly that is wonderful, and it's going to put Omaha on the map if it isn't already. I was going to follow up on the block scheduling just for a second and just reinforce for Mrs. Cassidy, having, as you know, taught at block schedules. I am a strong proponent of them. The block to block, the bell to bell teaching, the fewer kids in the hallways, the only taking attendance 4 times a day instead of 8 times a day, all of those things add up to me being a big fan of block scheduling, and you made a very persuasive argument why it's a good idea. Just going to ask you for probably the 100th time if what we're looking for is as much variety and choices and options in our schools. Did we consider and then discard, which I could buy into since I like block scheduling, the concept of having 1 or 2 schools be traditional scheduling?
As we navigate and we look at what is expected for content standards to be taught, the consideration was really also important for us to be consistent as a system. And how does that look for us as a system? And so it really was for us to work toward every school being on the same schedule.
One of the things that I heard from people that were concerned about moving from traditional to block, and I'm not a good enough a mathematician to figure it out, but that there would be, you described 64 classes available, but in the traditional, they had the perception that there were fewer classes to be able to squeeze into their 4 years. I know one of the things we did at North was we had a 0 hour. Is it expected or anticipated that that will still be the case in our schools or not?
The 0 hour is always still an option that can be taken into consideration, but as we are looking at the courses and working with the master schedulers on that, sometimes the 9th period is a lunch block. And so it is really taking a look at their entire school, taking a look at every classroom and how it's being used during the day, how the school is being utilized. That's part of the reason for our visits to school, to better understand that, and actually doing a master scheduling board that you can actually see what does that look like every period of the day, and as we're working to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our students during that time. So we are having all of those conversations individually with every school.
One of the things that you indicated was that at the, I'm super excited about freshman academies. I just think that even without following up on an incredibly interrupted schooling, period of time, they clearly would be a great idea. And you indicated that it's at the end of the freshman academy that a student would select what it is they want to do. It's not entirely accurate because by choosing to go to North High School, even if you're doing your freshman academy at North High School, you have already made a decision during your eighth grade year. And I know that this is a big concern for people, and I don't have to worry about it myself at this point, but I guess the question is, have we increased our intensity of counseling for the 8th graders? Because they are, in effect, making a career choice is way overstating it, but they're going down a certain lane or another, and it's not just happening at the end of their freshman year. So what are we doing for our 8th graders to help them pick what school to go to?
So school choice, we had virtual open houses. Schools were able to talk and share about what it is that they will be offering and what does that potentially look like as we were evolving through this conversation. One of the pieces we know we need to make sure that we're thinking about is what does that K-12 experience look like, so that it's not just people starting to think about it in 8th grade when they're choosing their high school. We're actually starting to do some work around our middle level conversation so that we're hopefully making our families more aware, even at middle school, what does that high school experience look like for them in the future. So it's having the opportunity to look at things as a system is also very beneficial for our families to better understand everything that is happening for them as a pre-K student all the way through the 12th grade. So trying to build that vertical conversation.
So are you saying that as kids were going through their open houses this last month and visiting all the high schools that we currently have, there was already a discussion about what the offerings were in those high schools?
They weren't going to be able to go into deep discussion into what every single course is, but they had every high school had an understanding of their overview. They've known that for a while. They just weren't able to go into great detail to all of the different offerings that it would look like, because it was still evolving.
And then
But it's in the course guides. We've created a sheet that goes into the course guide that outlines what are the required courses, what would a pathway look like, what are the electives, and then some additional information, as Delane mentioned earlier.
No, that's super helpful, because I need to be as informed as I can be when people ask me these questions, so, and I super appreciate that. Looking on this page for a second then, one of the things I really appreciate is what Dr. Logan was talking about was the involvement of the schools, principals, leadership teams in deciding whether they wanted to be an academy or pathway. I think based on the questions I'm getting, it appears that people think it was a push-down decision, and I think that maybe not enough time has been spent explaining, no, the schools were making those decisions on their own. So I think that's a really important point to make. Looking at that chart, then you said Central High is a pathway. These are its areas of pathways, and then I think responding to what Nick asked, and maybe Mrs. Kratke as well, if you're going down leadership, what you're telling me is that I might pick teaching as a profession within my leadership pathway, and that's actually going to be all those extra classes I take that are in the far right-hand column, right? So it's not just leadership, it is one of these leadership items. Or Mrs. Kratke in the air and space, the whatever you said, aeronautics engineering would be that piece. So could you, in 25 words or less, remind us what makes Central High a pathway in terms of those classes? What does that mean if I'm in Central High and I'm going to pick journalism as my leadership pathway? What does my life look like?
So leadership is an overarching theme. I don't know that we even have a class titled leadership in any one of those single pathways, but the emerging theme is that in any one of those pathways, whether it be journalism, whether it would be marketing, whether it would be teaching as a profession, we want those kids to walk out of those pathways and be the next series of leaders in our community in those, either in those particular areas, or take those skills to another area where they'll transfer them to be a leader again in our community.
If Central had chosen to be I guess really what I'm asking is, practically speaking, as a kiddo at Central High School, does a pathway just mean I'm sort of making my way through those classes and come out with a value, but an academy is I'm taking classes with the same kids mostly, or have I got it backwards?
An academy is another cohort. So we talk about the freshman academy, where we'll have teams of freshmen. So you'll have the freshman seminar class, but you might have your English class and your science class with, not with all the same, group, but 150 freshmen are kind of moving together in a smaller learning community. Very similar to what we have in our middle schools now. My son is, I think, on the 8B team at his middle school, and he's been with that team now for 4 years in his middle school. So it's really transitioning that concept to academies. So if you're in the engineering, Project Lead the Way Engineering Academy at Burke, you will have more than likely the same social studies teacher and the same English teacher as your peers in that same academy. In a pathway school, it's more departmentalized, and some of our schools have done more professional development in and around keeping their departments in the robust way that they have over the past several years. So it would be more of a move right now to shift them into that kind of an academy environment from where they currently stand. So again, lightening that lift a little bit. We can accomplish the same concept around that far right column by doing pathways and still having the departmental approach across all the other courses that they would take in their schedule.
Now, staying on that schedule just for 1 second, if I'm in the business entrepreneurship pathway and I have zero interest in concert band or JROTC or some of these other things that are in the green boxes, can I assume that I have more yellow things that I could pick up that are in that? So I could be
Yes.
taking 2 of those business electives every day if I wanted to, or a 0 hour if possible.
Yes.
Okay. Now, and I think this is what Mr. Head was asking. If I go into whatever school this is at, and I'm really, really not in the least bit interested in having a pathway, the reality is that I will nonetheless, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I will be in a pathway. I'll have to pick the one that interests me the most, which may be on a scale of 1 to 10, 1, but I will be in a pathway or academy, depending on where I am. And at the end of my 4-year career, like it or not, I will have had a concentration of some kind that, according to our data, suggests that I'm going to be a better student and more likely to graduate, even if it was against my own instincts.
And we've looked at some student schedules and have realized those that have maybe declared or are in kind of a liberal arts sort of schedule, they've taken 2 years of computer science, so they've completed, close to a pathway. It's happening organically in some cases where we don't even realize it's happening.
That I expected that was the case, but that's really good to know. And I think, oh my goodness, that's everything. Thank you very much. I'm super excited. I'm glad we're not trying to do it all this fall. That was a little intimidating. My heart does go out to teachers who are used to teaching at 45 minutes at a time and having to create longer lessons. On the other hand, like I said, I really liked doing it, and I wish you hadn't gotten rid of my one and only ethnic studies class. It was the only one in the district. I don't know why you didn't keep it. Could. Oh, yeah, I'll put it on the agenda. Thank you very much.
Okay, I just have a couple quick questions. I talked to Dr. Logan about this just briefly, but I just want to ask publicly in case I'm a student who attends the Career Center and I'm seeing all these things, and I'm wondering, where does the Career Center fit in with all of this?
The Career Center is still outlined in our course guides. And really it's in the, going back to, so the green spaces as well could be filled with Career Center. We don't have like the CNA program at all of our high schools right now, so our Career Center is still filling that gap for students that have that interest and can still make the shift to visit our Career Center every day. We have some students that really still want that.
Great, thank you. And then my last question is, with the teaching pathway, has it been considered or discussed at all with using that as a recruitment tool for future teachers for our district?
It has. We want to grow our own, absolutely. And even to the point where North High, so all of our high schools have teaching as a profession, as a pathway. We want North High, and it doesn't exclusively have to happen, but there will be focus in and around STEM, since they're a STEM school. So filling in some of the green spaces with a STEM class or two, so that maybe they can come back and teach computer science for us in 5 to 7 years would be an incredible piece. Definitely, yes. We want to connect and grow our own.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much for the presentation. Any final questions from colleagues at all? Oh, Mr. Head?
Yeah, thank you, President Holman. I've just got one more real quick. So I looking at this, on one hand, it sounds like it's a whole bunch of new programming and courses that are coming together, and then on the other hand, it sounds like it's more existing classes that are kind of being repurposed to fit the new plan. So in the big picture, I guess, what's the estimated impact on the bottom line or on the budget? You know, how much is this going to cost in the schools? And then knowing what we anticipate the cost to be and knowing, you know, kind of the metrics that we're looking at increased graduation rates, things of that nature. But, you know, if it's going to cost us, say, $5 million and graduation rate goes up 0.1%, is that really worth the cost? So how are we weighing all that?
So we're really not adjusting staff with how we're doing this. As you said, we are making some shifts or going deeper in some courses. So the same teachers are really going to be doing that in a lot of cases, or it might be a shift of teachers within a department that may shift into maybe teaching computer science again instead of teaching a personal finance class in the past. So we're not planning to increase the number of teachers at this point in time. We are still considering 2 new high schools and how the enrollment shifts to those schools that we'll need to adjust staff appropriately as well. And I know Mr. Wakefield is here. If he has any more to add to that, he can certainly. No, he's shaking no, so I must have covered it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all so much for all the presentations tonight. Thank you, colleagues, for all your questions, and everyone that joined us tonight. Yes. And that is it for tonight. Let the record reflect that the board meeting adjourned at 9:01 p.m.